Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. For those in-house, we appreciate you checking that cell phones have been silenced as we prepare to begin. And, of course, our internet viewers are reminded that questions or comments can be submitted throughout our programming, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org, speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our program and providing opening remarks is James Shirk, who is our Research Fellow in Labor Economics, part of our Center for Data Analysis in the Institute of Economic Freedom and Opportunity. He joined Heritage in 2006, researches ways to promote competition and mobility in the workforce instead of erecting barriers and preventing workers from getting ahead. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics and mathematics at Hillsdale College, and he received his master's degree in economics with a concentration in econometrics and labor economics from the University of Rochester in New York. Please join me in welcoming James Shirk. James?
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone who's here today, and thank you to everyone watching online. The economy has changed a lot in recent generations, and how the government should respond to it and the way to best empower workers has been a fairly contentious topic. The White House is going to be hosting a summit tomorrow that they're calling a Summit on Workers' Voice. And yet, looking at the roster of people they have invited to speak, it seems they're going to be presenting a very one-sided picture of the way the economy has changed. Now, I'm going to apologize to everyone. We had some technical issues, so I had slides that were supposed to go with this. They've instead been printed and put in the packet, so you can see the color slides. Apologize for doing that. It just came up yesterday that for whatever reason our slides went down. But if you look on the first page of those slides, you see basically the story that you're hearing an awful lot from the White House and groups allied with the White House. That union membership has been falling down, and workers' productivity has been going up, and yet their pay has been flat. And the lesson they take from this is that workers basically need unions. That unions are the thing that will fight for the workers and get them their fair share of the pie that the employers are otherwise denying them. And it's a fairly powerful argument if it were true. But as we'll see, there's a lot of problems with this story. And I think this simplistic notion that workers need unions needs a lot more clarification. Workers certainly have a right to unionize if they want to. We have free association, and it's a federally protected right. But the notion that we ought to be changing federal law to push workers into unions, to restrict the use of secret ballots in union elections, to shorten the amount of time that workers have to decide whether or not they want to join a union, the notion that workers are better served without a secret ballot, all seem to me very questionable. And the best way to get a handle on this is, if you're looking at the slides, look at the next slide. This is a survey recently done by Gallup, and it's a fairly bracing survey. It asks workers, who are both union members and non-union members, if they're satisfied with different aspects of their jobs. The only one where union members come out ahead is on their health insurance benefits. Pretty much everything else, there's either no advantage to being in a union, or for many of these, the union members say that they are worse off than those who are not in the union. So physical safety of your workplace, 57% of union members say they're completely satisfied with it. 73% of non-union members. Recognition you receive at work for your accomplishments, 15 percentage points higher in non-union workplaces. Flexibility of your hours, your job security, the amount of work that's required of you, all substantially better in non-union workplaces. Now, if you're a union member, one way to take that is to say, whoa, this is appalling. Another way to take that is to say, all right, well, hang on a second. Why would that be the case? Maybe workers aren't randomly forming a union. Maybe it's the workers who don't like their boss who decide to unionize. Maybe it's the workers with the unsafe workplaces and the lack of flexibility in their schedules. And I think that is a very fair point. That is almost certainly what's driving a lot of this gap here. It's the old adage is management gets the union it deserves. A company that treats its workers well, many of them are not going to feel the need to pay $500,000 a year to buy protection against their boss from a union. A company that treats its workers badly, treats people like things, uses people as simply means to an economic ends instead of respecting their dignity as a person, they're going to get unionized and they deserve it. So taking that in mind, that's not a terribly surprising finding. And that's a fair response to the unions. But we need to remember that this goes both ways. Unions love to say union members make more than non-union members. They'll point to statistics, true statistics, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that say, here's a union member, here's a non-union member. On average, your pay is about 20% higher if you're in a union. But unions don't randomly target workplaces to organize. Just as workers don't randomly decide to join a union or not, unions are very selective in where they try and organize. Unions try to organize larger companies. It's like any business, you've got economies of scale. It's cheaper for a union to organize one factory of 1,000 workers than 20 factories of 50 workers. And so unions will tend to organize larger workplaces, and they tend to organize more high productivity workplaces. Because if your company is on the edge and not doing so well, you're probably not going to be terribly interested in bringing in a union if you're already right on the edge. Now, what do we know about large, high-productivity workplaces? The next two slides, by the way, simply show that you see a lot more union organizing in large companies and in high-productivity companies. Overwhelmingly, most of the unionized companies come in the top half of the productivity distribution. Well, large companies and high-productivity companies, all else equal, tend to pay higher wages. And so just as it would be unfair to say, all right, let's take a look at this huge gap in job satisfaction and say that unions make workers hate their jobs, it's equally, unfair is not quite the right word, inaccurate and simplistic to say that unions raise wages. What you really want to take a look at is what happens to workers after they vote to unionize. So we're holding factor whatever effects drive the union to target the bigger, higher paying, more productive companies, and say, do wages go up or down before or after? And then you'd want to compare those workers to companies where the unions came in and tried to win the election and did not. And what we find is that there's almost no effect of unions on average wages in the economy anymore. The next slide is a table. You can roughly interpret those numbers as percentage point changes. What you see is there was one early study from 1990 that found that wages went up by about 7%, and it only compared about 60 union and 60 non-union companies. Further on, studies have been done comparing almost everyone, basically every National Labor Relations Board certified election that's been done since 1980. And you don't find any higher wages at the union companies. Now, you could say, okay, maybe there's some problems with those studies. In fact, there was a recent study that took a look at it and said, actually, we did find some statistical biases in these studies. When they corrected for those statistical biases, they found that average wages actually fell. Now, that's an interesting finding. If you look at the next page, this is a chart. This is an MIT-trained economist, Brigham Franson, and he's comparing wage growth in companies before they unionize and after they unionize. And that little red bar down the middle of the page is basically the 50% vote threshold. So the companies to the left of that bar, the union got 48, 47, 46% of the vote, didn't get in. Companies to the right, they got 51, 52, 53, and so on, and they got in. And you actually notice that on the second panel, before the union election takes place, there's no difference in wages. After the union election, wages fall. Why is that? Well, the answer turns out to be that a lot of the high-performing workers leave unionized companies, that they don't want to work for a seniority system that doesn't recognize their individual contributions and their performance. And so a lot of workers who were more highly paid beforehand go and simply leave and work for a different company. So when Brigham Franson controlled for that and said, let's just take a look at the workers who stay at the company before and afterwards. Then, and that's the bottom panel here. Again, he finds no effect of unions on wages. And if you're the union movement, this is a fairly challenging finding. Because what do unions exist to do? Primarily, why would a worker want to join a union? Well, either A, they're just really upset at their boss and want to stick it to the man. And that actually turns out to be a major driving factor behind successful organizing drives. When you talk to the people who work in these campaigns, both the unions and the non-union, they'll say the boss is the best organizer. That if you've got a bad boss who's mistreating his workers, that's where you're going to get unionized. And if you've got a good boss, then a lot harder for the union to make its case. But if the union can't get you higher wages and you're happy with the job your company is doing, why are you paying them $500 to $1,000 a year? And the economics of this are, again, fairly simple. We have a competitive economy, and a much more competitive economy now than we used to. We have an economy where through trade and deregulation internally, there's a lot more competition. So if you're a union company and the union's saying, we want you to pay our members 20% higher than the market wage, Well, the company has to pass that on to their customers. That's where they get their money from. They don't have a giant pot of money in the bank. They get their money from their customers. And the customers are likely to say, why are we paying you more money for the same product? And they're likely to not shop there anymore. And this has been the story, unfortunately, of a lot of unionized stores. A&P grocery stores, you may have heard, is filing for bankruptcy. A major grocery store across the Northeast. That's 28,000 union jobs going away. And so unions recognize this, and for the most part, they don't push anymore for wage increases that will threaten the viability of their members' jobs. But the flip side of that is then why are we pushing workers to try and join a union if it's not getting them higher pay? And there can be a downside to workers of being unionized. The next slide here, these are some polls done by Frank Luntz, a fairly well-known pollster that he did a few years ago in the run-up to midterm elections. And he did a survey of union members in the government and in the private sector. And he asked them a number of questions, like, who do you think that your union officers are looking out for? Themselves or the little guy? Not even close. Themselves. Now, when union members themselves are saying, we don't think our officers have our best interest at heart, that they're primarily focused on themselves, maybe we ought not be pushing workers into the unions quite so hard. If they want to join, by all means, you have that right. But why are we taking away secret ballot elections and trying to rush workers into making this decision? We see the same thing when asked about the value they get for their dues. Pretty overwhelmingly, more than half of union members are saying they don't get enough value for the dues they're paying. So if you're a worker who does feel that the union representation is worth the price, by all means. But I don't think we should have this focus that I think too many in Congress, and certainly on the National Labor Relations Board, have saying we know a union's good for a worker, and let's try and change the law to make it as hard as possible for workers who wanted to not have that union have their way. I mean, we're seeing this with the ambush elections. We're seeing this with so many of the National Labor Relations Board's rule changes. And they're all designed to push workers into unions. They're possibly blowing up the entire franchise business model in the interest of pushing workers into unions. But why are we doing this if they're not getting higher wages, and in many cases, the union members themselves aren't satisfied with the services? I think what we ought to be focusing on in policy is ways to hold unions more accountable to their members, to give the individual workers more say over how the union represents them. So there's more pressure on the unions to offer a high-quality service. And I think we'll be hearing later today from some workers who have some ideas on ways, both that the union membership has fallen short of the promises that were made to them, and also policies that would help their union hold them more accountable. But what about the second half of that chart that's being pushed around by the White House? And this is the next set of slides. That huge gap between pay and productivity. Well, this goes back to that old phrasing, there's lies, darn lies, and statistics. That graph is a very powerful graph, but if you actually look underneath the hood, there's not much there, because they're comparing the pay and productivity of different groups of workers, and they're using different measures of inflation that are different because of just methodological issues that have nothing to do with anyone's difference in pay. Issues that have to do with how do you weight housing versus healthcare versus money spent at restaurants, and to use a chain basket versus a fixed basket. I won't go any more into those technical details because I can see eyes starting to glaze over. But that is what drives that enormous gap. So if you just take a look at some of these slides, the first slide reproduces that chart the White House has been pushing out so much. The second slide says, all right, wait a minute. The wages there don't look at the wages of all the workers in the economy. And it's not even a historically consistent measure of wages. The Bureau of Labor Statistics changed how they did that survey in the mid-1980s to bring in a lot more small businesses and service sector workers. Well, small businesses and service sector jobs tend to pay less than manufacturing jobs, which used to make up most of the survey. And so that other wage survey shows less wage growth and compensation growth than any other survey the government conducts. So let's just take a look at a different survey that looks at the entire economy, and whoa, half the gap between pay and productivity just disappears. That's pretty surprising. That's not what you see in those headline figures. And then look at the next slide, and I won't go too much in depth on the differences in inflation measures, but if you look at the line that says IPD, implicit price deflator, then that's the same measure of inflation that's being used for the productivity figures. And whoa, we go from this enormous gap to very small gap, bit of a gap and not much left. You look at all the workers in the economy, use the same measure of inflation, gap's mostly gone. Now let's do one more thing. What that chart is doing is it's including the productivity of self-employed workers. Now that could be someone who runs their own grocery store, but it's also, say, a self-employed plumber. And it's also a lot of people we don't tend to think of as being self-employed. People like the drivers who work with Uber and Lyft, or someone who rents out houses in apartments on Airbnb. A lot of these new economy jobs are, in the official national statistics, recorded as sole proprietorship income, self-employment income, and they're not being counted in employee income. Well, the guy who's driving cars for Uber or Lyft, the person who's making a living renting out an apartment on Airbnb, probably thinks of themselves as a worker. And it's probably a misleading comparison to leave them out of the figures. So let's just you make that one more change. Let's say if we're going to leave them out of the wages, which it is tough to get a measure of, of average wages in that sector, let's also take out the productivity. And the gap entirely disappears. There is, once you compare statistical apples to oranges, there is no difference between the average productivity across the economy and average wage growth. The challenge facing policymakers is how to help workers become more productive and how to tear down barriers to using their existing skills. Very clearly, what we've seen in the economy over the past generation, contra the story being told by the White House, is when workers become more productive, their pay goes up. That is why 97% of Americans make more than the minimum wage, despite there being no federal law saying that they have to. It's not that the companies are so generous. Many of the bosses are generous, but that's besides the point. It's the economic forces that compel businesses to pay workers according to their productivity. What we have to do is look for ways to help workers become more productive and use their existing skills. Education reform, I think, is an excellent topic, but it's not the topic of our conference today, so I'm going to step past that. But there is an enormous and underreported barrier to workers using their skills today in the economy, and that is occupational licensing. 1 in 3 jobs in the economy now, 1 in 3 jobs require a government license to perform. These numbers, by the way, come from Dr. Alan Kruger, who is the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for the Obama administration. So hardly a right-wing source. He conducted them in conjunction with Morris Kleiner of the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Policy up at the University of Minnesota, and he is the AFL-CIO chair of labor economics up there. So hardly conservative sources, finding that 1 in 3 jobs in the economy need government permission to perform. Now, some of these jobs make perfect sense. If I were going in for brain surgery, I would darn well want to make sure that was a licensed brain surgeon. I have asthma. When I go to the pharmacy, I want to make sure that the pharmacist knows what they're doing when they're fulfilling my prescription for my asthma medication. But there are an awful lot of jobs in the economy that do not require, that do not seem to need any government licensing whatsoever. If you're in Louisiana, so the next slide here just compares some of these licensing requirements, and they can be pretty onerous requirements. So in Louisiana, you have to have a license to be a florist. Yes, if you want to arrange flowers, you need a license. And to pass that test, there's actually only a 36% pass rate on the exam in Louisiana. That's roughly half the pass rate for the bar in Louisiana. Why do we have a more stringent test for flower designs than for lawyers? Why is it that in Michigan, it takes you roughly 4 years to become an athletic trainer, and yet you can be certified to be an emergency medical technician in 26 days? That's kind of curious. Why is it in Nevada you have to pay $1,500 for a tour guide license, but only $700 to take the Nevada bar exam? If you look at the stringency of some of the licensing requirements, they seem way out of whack with anything pertaining to the actual safety needs. And what a lot of economists, Alan Kruger among them, and the White House, by the way, agrees with this. They put out an excellent report recently on occupational licensing, highlighting these facts. But what appears to be going on is who is pushing for these laws? Very rarely is it consumer groups. Usually it is the incumbent practitioners themselves. These new licensing laws, when they take effect, usually don't apply to the existing workers, just anyone else who wants to come into your field. And so it's a way of locking out competition. That if you need the government's permission to work as a florist, and only 1 in 3 potential florists can actually pass the exam, tough cookies for you guys. But it's darn well good for those who are existing in the occupation and don't have to take the exam because they've been grandfathered in. And it is a way of restricting competition and restricting access to jobs. The next and the final slide I had is a table from the Institute for Justice, where they took a look at a lot of middle-income jobs that are licensed by the government. And these make no sense. There are 4 states that require interior designers to have a government license. 46 states do not think you need a license to be an interior designer. 4 do. And on average, those 4 states require 6 years of study to be an interior designer. Every state in the country now licenses barbers. When I first wrote on this issue, it was every state but Alabama, and then Alabama decided that they were going to get with the program and they licensed it too. Now, you can see here that the average amount of study it takes to become a barber is over a year. Now, I understand it's a bit different for women, but for me as a guy, the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut is about 3 weeks. Why do you need to study for a year to be a barber? And you're allowed to cut hair for your friends for free. That's totally allowed. There's no law against you cutting hair for your friends. That's not a health or safety risk. But if you want to make a living doing it, if you're good at cutting hair, well, you better study for a year, and by the way, pay money to all these exams. Cosmetology, again. In every state in the country licenses cosmetology, and it requires more than a year of training. My favorite example is the state of Maryland, where many Maryland counties license fortune tellers. Now, there's many things I could say about you going to a fortune teller, but the notion you need a government license, what are they trying to protect you against? You might get an inaccurate prediction of your future. I mean, why do we do this? And the reason we do it, again, is lobbying from these groups to keep out workers, which is great if you're on the inside of this licensing cartel, but is horrible for the workers who are affected by it. And the pressure is always for more and more and more and more and more. That there's only 4 states in the country that license interior designers. But there's basically an association, a professional association of interior designers that has been pushing very hard to license interior designers in more states. It's not coming from customers saying, oh man, the couch and that picture just did not work. I don't like this interior design. It's coming from the trade associations themselves. And so we're going to hear later on in the panel, after the panel, the workers who've been in unions, we're going to hear from people who've been affected directly by occupational licensing. This is something where there's broad bipartisan agreement on it being a problem, but very little attention is paid to it in practical terms as a policy issue. The White House, from what I could tell from the look of their invitees to the Workers' Summit, despite that amazing occupational licensing report they put out, I didn't see anyone who was being held back by, there to speak for all the workers who've been held back and held out of occupations by excessive occupational licensing. And again, think, who does this most hit? If you're coming from a family of means, most likely you can afford to spend a year out of the labor market and pay several $1,000s to go to the cosmetology school or the barber school or whatever it is. The people who are most hurt by this are the workers who cannot afford to spend a year not working. It's a single mother who you simply can't afford to not be providing for her family for that year while she studies for the certification. And as a result, she's frozen out of those good jobs. It's the father with the young kids who, again, needs to put bread on the table now. His family can't spot him the money, and so he just can't work as a barber or can't work as a drywall installer or many of these other occupations where they're frozen out. This is an enormous problem. It affects 1 in 3 jobs in the economy. Most of that is superfluous, and it's something that we believe that policymakers ought to be paying a lot more attention to. And now to introduce some actual real workers, I'd like to introduce Matt Patterson, who's the director of the Center for Worker Freedom at the Americans for Tax Reform, and if the workers on Matt's panel could also come up.
Well, thank you, James, and thanks for reminding me my interior design license is expired. Need to get that renewed. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Patterson from the Center for Worker Freedom. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to our guests. We have here represented workers from across the country, representing many different industries, public and private sector. What they all have in common is they've got a good look at the union, what the union has to offer, and they've decided it's not for them. Unions claim to speak for workers. They claim to speak for all workers, arrogantly. That's not always true. It's not even often true. And it's certainly not true of our guests. So I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and then we're going to hear them tell their stories and then take some questions. This is Jesse Rojas. He's a representative for Sylvia Lopez. Sylvia is a farm worker from Fresno, California, and she couldn't be here today because of a family emergency of a very serious nature. And if she's watching, I hope she knows that we're hoping everything's better very soon. But Jesse is a family friend, and he's here to read a statement on her behalf and speak about her situation. Next, we have Megan Kelly. Megan is a flight attendant based in Orlando, Florida. Next to her, we have Jim Perry-Ellis. He's a public school teacher from Michigan. And we have Karen Cox. She's a lift truck operator from Illinois. And on the very end, my old friend Mike Burton, an auto worker from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Jesse, let me start with you. First of all, tell us who Sylvia Lopez is and what has happened to her in the last 2 years.
Well, Sylvia Lopez has been heading the decertification process in a farm in Fresno, California. There's over 3,000 farm workers in the Central Valley in California that do not need the United Farm Workers. And on November 5th, 2013, they petitioned the state agency called the Agricultural Labor Relations Board to do an election to kick out the UFW. They refused to do this election 3 times. They collected thousands of signatures over and over again until finally, after several demonstrations, they got their election. Well, next month is going to be the 2-year anniversary of the ALRB state agency not wanting to count their ballots. So up until now, they have refused to count their ballots from that decertification election.
Yeah, so this is the United Farm Workers. They had won an election back in the 90s. They had not bargained for a contract. No contract was agreed to. So 20 years passed, and many of the workers at this farm, called Gowan Farms in the Central Valley, didn't even know that they worked at a unionized farm until in 2012, the UFW came back and started demanding 3% of their pay. And I understand, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, Sylvia personally collected almost 3,000 signatures twice?
Yes, she collected thousands of signatures with some of her main co-workers twice because they refused to count those signatures petitions.
So why would the state labor board refuse to count votes from a decertification election? What possible reason would they have to not count those votes?
Well, you see, the reason is the ALRB, which was established by Governor Jerry Brown to protect farm worker rights. That was the original intention.
The first time he was governor, right?
The first
Back
time
in
he was
the
governor,
70s,
yeah, back in the 70s. Also, when he brought the public employee unions. They depend on each other. The ALRB depends on the UFW survival, and the UFW depends on the ALRB survival. So they work for each other. And as you may have seen recently, there are a lot of top officials at the ALRB that were former UFW organizers and students.
Yeah, so just so everyone is clear, you have a state labor authority that exists to mediate disputes between farm unions and farm workers. There's really only one farm union to speak of, the UFW. So it really is true that they depend on each other, and the ALRB, it's certainly not in their interest to have the UFW decertified at this farm. Would you say that's the case?
Exactly.
And I understand Sylvia has a statement she's given to you, if you'd like to read that now.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Sylvia Lopez, and I headed the decertification process against the United Farm Workers in our company, Gowan Farms in Fresno, California. This is a union that abandoned us for over 20 years and that has nothing to offer us but to take 3% of our paychecks and have control over our lives. After several demonstrations, we finally had our election on November 5th, 2013, to vote out the UFW. But yet the ALRB state agency has refused to count our ballots. It is almost 2 years now, and yet our votes have not been counted. I wish I could be here today to speak, but due to family health issues, I'm unable to. But I am glad that Jesse's here representing over 3,000 of us farm workers. We need help so that our voices can be heard and so that the union and government corruption in California can be exposed. I appreciate all of you here today that are listening to our struggle and hope that you can shine the light on the biggest labor dispute in California. We are the highest paid industry workers, and we do not need a union. We know what we want and what is better for our families. We are not ignorant, even though that's what the UFW would like everyone to believe. We want to work in peace, and we want our civil rights to be respected. We want the Agricultural Labor Relations Board of California to count our votes and the UFW to respect our choice. Is that too much to ask for?
Unfortunately, apparently, it is too much to ask for. Jesse, I think Sylvia touched on one of the things that most irritates the farm workers there, and that's this issue of control. Tell me, besides the pay, they don't want to give up 3% of their pay, but what else would a unionized collective bargain farm do for the workers that they don't like, that they don't need? What specifically bothers them about the UFW?
The main thing about the UFW is they have harassed them at their homes, at their workplace over and over again every single day. They've showed up to their homes, at night, during the afternoon to try to force them into the union. They've even accused them of being illegals and calling immigration on them if they don't join the union. Big irony behind the UFW, calling you out for being illegal. They've also, with this contract, with the UFW and the state-mandated contract, it wouldn't allow them to demonstrate. It would shut them out from protesting and demonstrating, which is their fundamental civil right. And the other thing that's big to them in this particular company is this company has a open-door policy. What that means is they can come and go during the season as they want. In most farms in California, if you don't show up to work for several days or several weeks, you usually cannot come back and get your job because it's a seasonal job. In this particular company, workers can leave for a couple of days, leave for a couple of weeks, and maybe go work somewhere else or go take care of some family needs, and they can always come back and get their job again and work again. Well, with this contract, they will be unable to do so.
So I think, this issue of freedom to negotiate directly with your employer, your own hours, when you work, how long you work, to come and go. They feel like the UFW is going to come between them and their employer, and that's in particular what they don't like, correct?
Yes.
So this is very indicative of the sort of one-size-fits-all model of traditional collective bargaining. But one size doesn't fit all, and has it ever, and I think especially as we move into the 21st century, people are so used to choice, and everything's tailored to them individually, whether it's our apps on our phone or a lot of people are working from home these days. Unions just seem more and more outdated, and I think Sylvia's plight is a good example of that. Let me move down to Jim. Jim, welcome. Thanks for making the long trek from Michigan.
Absolutely.
Jim, tell us what happened to you. You're a public school teacher, and your school was a part of the National Education Association, which is one of the larger teacher unions in the country.
The largest, yeah.
The largest and richest, I'm guessing. Tell us what happened to you and why you decided the NEA membership was not for you.
I come from a small town in north central Michigan called Roscommon. At the time we started our little process, there were about 70 of us. I've been a public school teacher for 24 years. My first year, first day on the job, actually, I was approached by the representative from the union and had a card and so forth. And
First day.
First day.
They don't waste any time.
And they said, "Here, put your name, all your contact information here. Your dues are going to be taken right out of your paycheck." And
Was it made clear to you you didn't have any choice
no,
in this?
no. I actually asked, "So do I have a choice?" And they're like, "Nope, no, you're in." And so, being a naive first-year teacher, I thought, all right, must be getting good value for these dollars. So, as the years progressed, my career progressed, we started to slowly realize that the Michigan Education Association, our state affiliate, really was not responsive to our needs in northern Michigan. We were doing a lot of our own collective bargaining and negotiating on our own. The dues kept going up and up and up, and one of the things we keep hearing is that unions are democratic, and they're some of the most undemocratic organizations I've ever been around. And,
Well, when they start by saying you don't have a choice, it's pretty
yeah,
clear.
absolutely. So there is, supposedly this process where you can voice your concerns, and we would send representatives to the council, and if anybody brought up trying to flatten the due structure or lower the dues, they would be shouted down, and so a lot of peer pressure, a lot of bullying that was going on. So
What were the dues like, Jim? About how much were you paying at this time?
At the time we left, our dues were going to be $980. So
A year?
almost a year.
Wow.
$1,000 a year.
And even though you were doing a lot of the collective bargaining yourself, so you didn't need the larger union to do that for you.
Absolutely. In this age of, in Michigan, there are laws with regards to transparency. And all public schools have to post all their financial information, their collective bargaining agreements, and so on and so forth. One of the areas we did actually lean on the union for is to get us information so we could negotiate from an informed point of view. And so now that information is out there, we had very little use for the expert advice of the union negotiators, and so we were doing all that on our own. The dues kept going up. One of the biggest concerns for us is these dollars were being spent in ways that were, to us, very outrageous, high, and I know the story is very similar here. You know, the top executives in the union were, you know, making six-figure salaries, and
Yeah.
and our local representative, we call them Uniserv directors in Michigan, and she was making $139,000 a year, which is $30,000 more than our superintendent was making.
Jeez.
So she was not even a top, she was a line level representative. So
So when you see your dues bill, you realize that's where your money is going.
yeah, absolutely. It was very difficult actually getting that information. Transparency is another thing that unions don't have. You ask questions like, you know, we have this liability insurance that the union pays for or paid for, and asking them how much does that cost? How much is the union paying? It's one of the benefits that they tout. You know, you're getting $1 million liability policy from the union, and it came out in a lawsuit that it was a little over $3 a year per teacher. Our teachers now have an option whether they want to purchase their own liability insurance for that amount of money or a little bit more. So we don't participate in a lot of the things that we did decertify in 2012.
Okay, so tell us what happened. You decided you've had enough. You organized some other teachers like-minded. We're sick of paying $1,000 a year to this. And then tell us what happened. How did you decertify, and how did the union take that?
Well, we actually, it was a 20-year process. We had
20 years.
two failed attempts in my
Wow.
24 years, and those are a whole different stories. There were a lot of shenanigans with the failed attempts. I could talk for another hour on that, but in 2012, we ended up contacting the Center for Independent Employees, and they helped us with providing legal representation and getting us through the process of how to leave the union, the statewide union, and form our own local. Most teachers, most workers don't realize that you can form your own local union, and we 65 teachers have our own local union now.
So you decertified, you started your own union, and tell us about that organization. How is it different than the NEA?
This is
MEA?
very different. The Roscommon Teachers Association, I'm very proud of my colleagues. We purchase our own legal advice. We have an attorney. We pay our negotiators for collective bargaining. We pay our executive board, and we give about $3,000 a year in scholarships for our seniors, and I proudly say that's about it. We don't provide pocket calendars or magazines or discount dry cleaning or any of these other frivolous things that the other larger unions used to say that was such a great benefit of being in the union.
And I'm guessing the dues aren't $1,000 a year anymore for you guys.
No, we immediately, the year we decertified in 2012, we democratically voted to set our dues at $600. So immediately we had about a $400 decrease on our dues, and then just last year we said, well, let's do it again, and so we're now down to $500 per year. So.
Wow. I mean, I know I'm still sleepy, but it sounded like you said a union actually voted to lower dues.
Incredible,
That's
isn't
crazy.
it?
That's
Incredible,
crazy.
yeah.
Well, congratulations. Let's hear it for Jim. Karen, nice to meet you.
Hi.
How are you? Tell us about your situation. What union did you encounter, and what did you think when you encountered this organization?
In spring of 2012, we had our WDSU Local 578. They were trying to get into our company. We knew we were going to have an election, or so we thought. Then one day we came into work, and all of a sudden we were told that, okay, the union's just here, no election.
Who told you that? A supervisor?
Supervisors.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, they couldn't really tell us anything else.
And that shocked you, I'm
I
guessing.
was shocked. I got into, not an argument, but maybe a heated discussion with one of the people that was supporting this union. I said, how's this even, this is un-American, how is this possible? And he really didn't have any good answers for me, so I had to call the NLRB and start the process and the learning. I've learned a lot. I didn't know what I was getting myself into at all. Early on, I contacted the National Right to Work Foundation and obtained a lawyer, Aaron Solom. He's been very helpful to me. We're almost 3 years together. And I filed 3 petitions to keep throwing it out.
To decertify.
To decertify.
How did they
yes.
get in if there was no election? Did they ever tell
Oh,
it?
yeah, they had people sign cards telling them.
Card check.
Yes, they told them, sign this card if you want information about the union. And so several people were, maybe I want it, maybe I don't. I'll sign this card and get information.
Because they
Well,
thought
then
they were just asking for information, not necessarily signing up.
Exactly.
Surprise.
Well, then the union took those signatures and used them essentially as a vote, presented them to the employer, and the employer accepted them in without an election.
Sound familiar, Mike? So, Karen, it's been a 3-year struggle now. How close are you to decertifying? Have you decertified?
On my 3rd petition, we were finally granted a decertification election. However, the union appealed it, even though they scheduled the ratification before I even filed that petition. They said they didn't have enough time to bargain. And a year and a half later, after they sealed up the ballots and we couldn't know right away after we had the election.
Sound familiar, Jesse?
A year and a half later, they decided we didn't deserve that election, and they destroyed our ballots, and we'll never know the results of that.
So they didn't need an election to get in. You needed an election to get out,
Yeah.
and they're not even going to count those votes.
Nope.
Wow.
That, as far as I know, they've been destroyed.
So what's next for you guys? Are you going to try again?
Well, we tried deauthorization in May. We lost by 3.
Oh,
Although if that had been a decertification election, we would have won. Because the numbers are, figured differently. But now we are waiting for spring to, there's a window that opens up 30, I believe it's 60 to 90 days before the mark of the 3-year mark of the contract. A window opens up where we can file petition to decertify again.
and I'm sure they're not taking dues from you until this is fully
Oh,
settled.
no, they've been
Oh, they have been.
hard.
Oh.
It's actually a big deal right now, what we're going through. Like, they're trying to get back dues now.
Really?
Yes.
What, do you mind?
Hundreds of dollars.
What are you paying a year, do you think, in dues?
It's $8.50 a week if you're a full membership.
Okay.
Or full member.
Well, I think the stories we've heard so far have one thing in common, which was they weren't really given a choice. And even when they tried to express a choice, they weren't heard. And I think un-American is the best word that I can think of to describe that process. Megan, you work for an airline. Which airline?
Allegiant Air.
Allegiant Air, and you're based in Florida.
Yes, sir, Sanford.
So when did you first encounter your union? What union is it, first of all?
Transport Workers Union.
Okay, and this is, they organize across the airline industry, flight attendants?
Dispatchers.
Dispatchers. And when did you join?
I became a flight attendant 2 years ago. Last month was my anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a great job. I didn't really know. I was aware when I came in that we had a union, but I didn't know what that really meant because I've never worked in a union environment before. I just thought they were here to help us. But then when I was in initial training, I'm in the mall and I'm watching TV and somebody is on there bashing my airline. And the other flight attendants with me, they're like, that's our union.
So the company you had just joined,
I'm still in training. I'm not even a flight attendant officially yet.
and you see your union, which I'm assuming you weren't given a choice.
Nope. Well, the flight attendants voted in the union back in 2010.
Okay.
And we're in 2015 and we still don't have a contract.
So what's taking so long?
They can't come to an agreement.
Interesting. Are they taking dues out?
No, we do not have to pay dues.
Okay.
As of yet.
So you're based in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Florida is a right-to-work state. Can you opt out of your union based on right to work?
No, sir. We
Tell us why.
We fall under the Railway Labor Act, meaning one's in the union, we're all in the union. It's done.
No right-to-work provisions for railway labor.
No,
Act.
we fall under a different category.
So, for those of you who don't know, the National Labor Relations Act, which governs most private sector employees, contains provisions, it was amended, called the Taft-Hartley Act, that allows people to opt out if their state passes what's called a right-to-work law. To date, 25 states have passed a right-to-work law, and 12 counties in Kentucky. But the transport industry is not under the National Labor Relations Act. That's under a separate law, so those right-to-work laws don't apply. And for Sylvia, that also doesn't apply to the agriculture industry. That's why there's a state labor authority. So even if California were a right-to-work state, it wouldn't apply to Sylvia. Exactly. Not that California would ever be a right-to-work state, God forbid. So Megan, what's next for you guys? It's been a long time. You still don't have a contract. And what are you trying to do now? Are you trying to get out of the union? Are you trying to decertify? What's happening?
We're in the process of decertifying our union. We had to get authorization cards. We had to have what is called a straw man. So we have a flight attendant from Bellingham, Washington. His name's Steve Stalker. And he stepped up and said he will represent us as a flight attendant group. And in order to be able to go forward to have 50% of votes to bring it to the National Mediation Board to hopefully decertify our union, which is extremely hard to do because we have, I don't know, I think we have like 12 bases. We're adding 3 more within the next half year. So, to organize that is pretty hard. And we got help from the Center for Independent Employees as well, which is great help.
Great. So it sounds like these unions are like the Godfather clan. It's easy to get in and impossible to get out.
It's hard.
So, Mr. Burton, good to see you again. Mike was a auto worker at Volkswagen in Chattanooga. Mike, last year the UAW had a very high-profile loss at your former workplace in Chattanooga. Tell us, first of all, when you joined Volkswagen, and then how long was it after you joined that you first encountered the UAW and their organizing activities?
I was fortunate to be employed by Volkswagen in April of 2011. It was the following summer that cards started being passed around for information purposes, and the pressure started mounting to become a part of this card signing process. And I promised to research it, and I did. And what I found concerned me so greatly that several of us met together that had the same concerns, and we wound up creating a core team that presented as much as possible the truth of what was happening to our plant, and if we weren't careful, we would lose our rights as individual employees and come under the auspices of UAW management.
What was it about the UAW, Mike, that concerned you as you were researching this?
We only have an hour, right? Well, first off, Volkswagen is a competitor to GM and Ford and Chrysler. Why would we want to have somebody come in and manage us when they really have the best interests of such a much larger group of employees? That's the first deal right there. Then how they went about it was sneaky. They actually, even before the plant was built, they were putting out flyers at other union-run plants saying, get your family members to go become employees at Volkswagen because we're going to get in there. Well, that wasn't part of the agreement when the state of Chattanooga offered considerable sums of money to have Volkswagen come to Chattanooga.
Something like $500 million in tax incentives to
I call
lure
that a-
Volkswagen to southeastern Tennessee. And
Right.
no one thought that that meant bringing the UAW.
That wasn't part of it. In fact, the first CEO that we had there was asked if the UAW was going to come on board, and he said, "Not on my watch." And he was gone shortly after that. So just an indication of the pressures that the UAW is able to give on a corporate level, and that's deeply concerning.
So just so everyone understands, the UAW, they've been trying to organize the foreign-owned auto factories in the Right to Work South for a long time. And I think it's fair to say they haven't had the success that they've wanted. They've tried in Mercedes and Tuscaloosa, Chattanooga, Volkswagen, Nissan in Mississippi. Mike, let me ask you this. Your colleagues at the factory, did they understand what was coming when you guys started researching this and distributing information? Did you have any idea it was going to be such a nasty, long slog?
No, and I don't know that I'm up for doing something like that again. However, our job is so much easier than all of your jobs. My hat is off to you because you're fighting to get them out. Once they're in, it's obvious from the statements you've heard here today, it's almost impossible to get them out. It's like putting tar and feathers together and then trying to separate them out. We have been successful in keeping them out as an official entity. When they lost, it's 51 to 49%, but a loss is a loss.
And this was February of last year.
This was February.
They had a representation election, and they lost 712 to 626, something like that.
It was close, and we were pleasantly surprised when we won. It was a cold, snowy night outside the offices there in the front of the building when the announcement came out, and now it's a whole new world. They were to have stayed out of the plant for a year, but somehow the rules don't apply to the UAW. It was 5 months later that all of a sudden they show up at the front door, and we are now Club 42 of the UAW, thinking that's an entity that is recognized by the company, by Volkswagen.
Mike, let me just
And
clarify.
that
So
wasn't the case.
After they lost the election, it was your understanding that they would have to wait a year before any organizing activity by federal law. That was your understanding?
Correct.
Okay, but that didn't happen.
No, that did not happen, and all of a sudden the fight is back on again. It took many flyers to the employees, and it took many meetings with whoever wanted to hear more about it. But what was important to us was that the employees needed to understand that they already have these rights to have representation, to go to management and say, we have these concerns. We do not need an organization that was given to us as one choice. It was the UAW or nothing. Well, we wound up having an election, the UAW or nothing. We chose nothing because when I was hired in 2011, it was like winning the lottery. Over 60,000 people actually applied to work at Volkswagen.
And for how many jobs available, Mike, do you know?
There were less than 2,000 jobs available. So to get that phone call to say, hey, come to work at Volkswagen, wow, that was fabulous. Those of us who came were very excited about it. Boy, there sure was a lot of overtime those first 2 summers, the first 2 years. You're getting a plant going. On a personal note, it helped my family get out of debt. It helped us refinance our house. I am loyal to Volkswagen until last month when they fired me. I was loyal. I was interested in my company making a profit. We do not need the UAW because they're a competitor to us, a representative of our major competitors, and to have them inside knowing our business, not a good business idea. And economically, the extra expense that they would have cost the company itself would have had to be passed on to the consumer. In pure economics, we're trying to make the best car possible and give it to the public at a fair profit to the company itself. That's how business runs. But apparently, that doesn't happen when the UAW comes in. A perfect case in point on their own business level, they spent over $6 million to try to get our plant to come under their control. They lost by 100 votes, by less than 100 votes. They ought to be mad about that. What's the point to them losing? What did they learn from this? You know what? If they had kept the promises they said, we will represent you, we will have people there to help. No. The response we got was, oh, well, once we're in, you guys are going to take care of business. Well, then, as was commented before, what do we need you for? We don't. As a knee-jerk reaction to them showing up 5 months after the election, we formed ACE, the American Council of Employees. We were never anti-union. We were anti-UAW. ACE is a legitimate union. Now, both ACE and the UAW Local 42 Club are recognized at Volkswagen as community organizations, and that is serving the purpose of helping to establish a works council, which everybody, all the employees at the plant, do wish to have a works council because that is part of the German basis of interaction between the plants worldwide and with management.
Mike,
Hey,
what is a
we're for
works
that.
council? Can you explain what that is and why people at Volkswagen seem to want it? That was certainly, I think, one of the big selling points that the UAW had. If you get us, you'll get a works council. What is a works council and what does it mean?
Well, it's actually in the UAW Constitution that they will never give up control to anything like a works council. So that would have been a misleading thing. And it's misleading to say that get us in as an official exclusive representative for the workers, and we're going to help this works council get going. In order to do that, they would be giving up powers to the works council, and that's just not the case. That's in their constitution that they would not give that up. And even having that in black and white, we can't convince folks that it's a bad deal if they get in. And once they get in, it's going to be 10 times worse to get out. And so,
Did they ever make promises that they could get you guys to higher pay or benefits or anything like? And I understand those were good paying jobs. Did that argument work? What do you think was their best argument?
I believe some of the younger workers, when they came in, had not been in a union experience before. And when you're offered $10 more an hour if the union gets in, well, hey, I'm paying attention. That's some good money. That's good. But that's not the case. If we would look at the other clients of the UAW, Chrysler and Ford, and compare their wage structures, they're identical. Ours were higher. If we came in under their umbrella, our wages would have dropped to match the others because that would have been fair. Instead of the big guys getting more money like us, it was the little guy was going to go down and match them. And being a foreign car manufacturer, they really don't want us here, is our opinion, because we're taking jobs away from union workers by being here non-union. And to sidestep to the European Union, IG Metall doesn't want them here either, because when we're making Passats in the United States, there are workers in Europe not making Passats.
Unionized workers in
Unionized
Germany
workers.
not
So-
making, so they don't like that.
This is a serious two-edged sword that we've had to fight severely. Now, what's baffling is that if we don't want a union, well, it's because that's best for the company, and management usually doesn't have a happy experience having to deal with the union because you've got the stewards in the way of the true opinion of the employees and all that has to be done. And our company seems to be wanting to have the UAW come in, and it's our belief that it's pressures from the German union that's causing that. And this is a serious statement because that's violating some laws, but nobody seems to care at this point. And when we become too vocal, they tend to not want to have you around anymore. And so I'm not around anymore. And I've done the best that I can with my team. We beat them last February. We showed the world that a secret ballot election is the true way to go. When individuals are cornered and bullied into signing a card just so they get the pressure off, so that they can fit in and go, okay, well, they're not official yet. And they're secretly hoping we do have a secret ballot election so they can give their true opinion in the polls. That is exactly what happened. Traditionally, the UAW does not wish to have a secret ballot election unless they've got 65% of, we're sure that 65% want to be in it. Well, I think they were fed some poor information by the locals because they had some seriously honest opinions from many of us, but those who didn't care to share a strong opinion would rather sign the card and kind of quietly get along with them. It showed in the election that card signing is not only wrong, but it's not showing the proper attitude of the collective will of the employees. We showed them in February, and I'd like to think that they're going to show them again if an election ever comes up.
Well, Karen, let me ask you, do you think that if you had had a secret ballot election and they didn't get in with card check, do you think the union would have won still? Or how do you think it would have?
It would have been very close. Like I said, we lost the deauthorization by 3, but we would have won. We wouldn't have won by a lot, but we would have won. It's almost split down the middle. But at least then we could say, well, at least we were able to have a voice
Right.
in the matter.
Megan, let me ask you this. You say when you joined your workplace, you hadn't worked for a unionized company before. What did you think when they came to you with this information? Did you wonder why you had to join, what it was going to do for you? How did they sell it to you?
Well, I didn't have a choice to join. So when I came in 2 years ago, I was already voted in 3 years prior to that, 3 years prior to that. So I didn't have a choice. We've grown. Our company's growing so much, and there's about 75% of workers who are here that did not have a choice. We did not have a say in this vote 5 years ago.
Because you joined after they
Because we joined
voted.
after it was already voted in.
What did you think when you saw your union bashing your company? What were they saying? What was their complaint?
They were
against the
talking about
company?
delays. They've created a website. It's out there on the internet. It's like I'm not gonna say what it is, but it's out there on the internet saying how we're not safe and all this stuff. And like we, the frontline employees, we deal with the passengers every day. When I have a passenger come on my plane saying, "Are we gonna be safe today? Are we gonna make it there?" Not only does that hurt my feelings, but I tell them, my answer is always, I would not be working here if I didn't feel like we were safe.
And you think the union perpetuates this idea that it's not safe as what, a bargaining tool?
It's called a corporate strategy. They're trying to pressure our company, our management team into like just agreeing with them so they can get off our backs and quit hurting our public image.
Interesting. Jim, how
Well, if I could just
Yeah, sure.
echo off of the secret ballot, this brought up a point. 20 years ago, we had our first decertification election, and it failed. And one of the options given to us, the Michigan Employment Relations Commission is what handled our union decertification, the statewide employment commission. And you have your option of a on-site ballot or a mail-in ballot. And that first election was on-site, and the statewide president and I believe somebody else, like maybe the secretary, drove to the little burg of Roscommon and was there on the day of the election. And I don't know to what degree there were shenanigans. I believe there were shenanigans, but the pressure of having those union executives right there at the on-site election, I believe, was very intimidating. And
by the way, that's a great Irish pub near here, Shenanigans. So you gotta try to check these by.
So one of the things, here we are, as 70 teachers at the time, that little things like requesting the mail-in ballot, where the CIE helped us with their attorneys. No, you don't want it on site. You want to have this a mail-in. You want it to be secret. No peer pressure, no pressure from the union and so forth. If you can fill out your ballot and send it to the Michigan Employment Relations Commission. So that's what we did. And we would not have received or known to do that without the help of some of these organizations, national organizations that are looking out for the workers.
Just let me ask you this. I had the pleasure of meeting many of the farm workers there in Fresno, and what seems to irritate them to me is that the UFW seems to think that they can speak for them all because they're all Latino, they're all farm workers, whatever, as if they all have the same opinion. Talk about the pressure that Sylvia and those workers felt from that union and the intimidation tactics.
Well, similar to what they were saying, the day of the decertification election at Gowan Farms, the ALRB officials, state officials, have told the employees that they only needed a pay stub or their worker ID to vote. Come down the morning when they show up to vote at the farm, at the last minute, the ALRB officials requested them 2 forms of ID to vote. Now, this is California. You don't even need an ID to vote in a normal election. But now you need 2 forms of ID to vote to get rid of a union. So this really irritated a lot of the farm workers. They had already shown up to work with their pay stubs or their worker IDs, and now they're requesting them 2 forms of ID. The other thing that the ALRB did, it segregated the employees. It separated them from non-UFW supporters to UFW supporters, which if you look at this particular case in this company, over 90% of this employees do not want the UFW. It's a very small amount of employees that might want the UFW, and it's maybe really because they don't know what they're not going to bring to the table. So the fact of them showing up to their homes, late at night, showing up to work every single day during lunchtime, and pressuring them into trying to join the union. The other irony behind this is the UFW has ran a phony PR campaign for a while now, bashing the very same fruits that they pick. So this is a union that's claiming to represent employees at this farm, but yet they're running campaigns, PR campaigns, to talk bad about the fruit they pick. Same thing as what they mentioned, to blackmail or pressure the company and the employees to eventually give in to what they want.
So I think you can see from all the workers represented here, the 2 constants, it seems to me, and this is true whenever I've been involved with any of these campaigns or issues, is a lack of choice and intimidation. I mean, those seem to be the recurring themes in organized labor that offend workers, turn workers off over and over again. It's the lack of accountability. It's the thuggish behavior, whether it's pressuring people to sign cards and using those cards as a vote. It's very undemocratic. It's very un-American. I think we're going to open up the floor. If anyone would like to ask any of these workers questions. Yes, sir. Can you please identify yourself? Identify yourself, Sean.
Yeah. I'm Sean Higgins. I'm with the Washington Examiner. For those of you who did encounter these, can you describe more specifically what the voter cards were that the unions presented, what they said, if it was actually on there that maybe in the fine print that you were joining a union by signing it, or if it didn't say that at all?
Mike, I know I've seen some of the cards from Volkswagen. There were 2 that I remember, and they said very different things. Can you talk about those?
That was my answer. Initially, it said for information, and then an identical card with just those few words changed came out that said this is to allow us to continue with your blessing. And that's how it works. Misleading.
Karen, did you see the cards that were circulated in your...
When I was asked if I was interested in the union, I immediately was not interested, so I was never presented with a card, so I actually have never seen one.
Anyone else? Yes, sir, in the back.
Hi there. My name's Jordan Bruno. Matt, you mentioned different legislation going to be pushed tomorrow at the White House that makes unionization easier and kind of facilitates it. Is there any legislation going on at the federal level that could serve as a counterweight to that and that would defend these union voices? Karen, maybe?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously a national right to work law would be great. There's the Employee Rights Act, which provides for a lot of the freedoms that are absent in today's labor regime. There's a lot of interesting things going on at the local level too, where you have in Kentucky, for example, counties who are sick of the state legislature dragging their heels on passing a right-to-work law for the whole state. So you have communities taking it upon themselves to pass local ordinances that give their county workers the option to opt out. I think it's really good to see communities take the lead on that, because it can be so hard to change a national labor regime or any regime of any kind. James, do you want to add to that?
Well, I would just sort of second, and I ask the workers, what policies? So we've heard some fairly negative ways the unions have interacted. I don't think the solution to that is to ban all unions. But what policies do you think would make the unions more accountable to you to prevent the sorts of abuses that you guys or Jesse, in your situation that Sylvia has experienced?
Well, I think speaking for this farm workers, all they want is their votes to be counted, because what the ALRB is arguing is that the company or the employer pressure them to vote out the UFW. Well, you can't really know until you count the ballots. It doesn't work this way. You should be able to count the votes, and then if there's any quote-unquote unfair labor practices that were reported, then you investigate. That's the way it usually works. But the way the ALRB has worked with the UFW using the laws in California has made it very difficult for these employees to just be able to follow the regular Agricultural Labor Relations Act, which is you petition an election, you collect enough signatures for the majority of the employees, and then you vote, and then you count the ballots, and then all types of investigations or claims that come from all parties then are investigated. This time it worked different. They pushed out as many legal terminology as they could to avoid the votes from being counted, and then they put together a 6-month hearing with an administrative law judge that would determine if the ballots were to be counted. Well, this administrative law judge happens to be paid by the ALRB 6 figures a year. He's an employee of the ALRB, so how can he be neutral about this case? So all around this, having a state agency like the ALRB working on the side of the UFW and using taxpayer dollars on top of that, it's very unfair, and I think it needs to be reformed.
And I think for the UFW specifically, it's an existential issue. Their membership was, reported to be anywhere from the 50s to 80,000 and its heyday, and now it's something close to 5 or 10,000. This is a very large farm. It's one of the largest farms in the country, and for them to be successful here, I think is necessary for their survival long term. So they actually can't afford to lose this. And Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but I bet if they had thought they had won that election, those ballots would have been counted 2 years ago.
Of course, if they had, like he mentioned, if they had over 65% for sure of the employees wanting the union, they would have voted the ballots right away. And it's important to note, Matt's right, there's a little bit over 3,000 active UFW members now. So if this contract was to be put in place, it would automatically double the income and the membership of the UFW. So it's definitely a big win for them. But you would picture if the overall goal of this union is to better the working conditions and improve the wages of workers, they wouldn't be focusing on this particular farm, which pays the employees the highest wages in the agricultural industry, has the best working conditions. Why not go focus on other farms that actually do might need some help to improve wages and working conditions?
Yes, sir.
I just want to see if the other workers want to.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that greater transparency was a huge issue with us. The Michigan Education Association, although they do have to file papers with regards to salaries and so forth, but it was really difficult to find out how your union dues were being spent, particularly on political issues. One of the philosophies of our new local union is to not spend the workers' dollars on political causes, and so we leave that up to them. We cut the dues, and so if they want to take their savings and support candidate A or candidate B, it's up to them. So greater transparency for unions.
I have 2 questions. The first one's for Megan. Can you give us the status of the decertification with the Legion Airlines? And for Karen, can you tell us the difference between a decertification and deauthorization, since you did both?
Well, our status right now is we are just waiting on the National Mediation Board to review our authorization cards and to get back with us. They've assigned us a case number and we're just waiting. We already turned in 50% plus cards to request for a vote. So we are asking, right now we're asking the National Mediation Board if we can have a vote so we can finally have a say in whether we want this union anymore or not.
And how long do you expect to wait for that answer?
Well, it's been a couple months since we turned it in. Hopefully not much longer.
The speed of bureaucracy.
Decertification is, the difference would be, I guess, it's getting rid of the union. And those numbers are calculated by, you have to have 50% plus one of the amount of people that vote. Deauthorization is where you're voting to deauthorize the union to require you to pay dues. That's calculated by everybody in the bargaining unit. So the numbers are different. So whether a person votes or not, they're going to be counted. So they almost, if you don't vote at all, you essentially become a no vote instead of a yes, I want to authorize.
So deauthorization doesn't get rid of the union, it just makes you a right-to-work employee within the company?
Pretty much, yes.
In the state of Illinois?
You do not have to pay dues, but they still have to represent you however
Do you
they
still have to pay a fee, a so-called agency fee?
No, not if you win a deauthorization. Everybody will have the choice to pay dues if you win a deauthorization.
Mike, let me ask you, Tennessee's a right-to-work state. So if the UAW had won that election, in theory, you guys would have had the option to opt out of dues. Was there any discussion of that in the worst-case scenario? Did you guys talk about that?
That didn't come up as a guiding point. If they had won, we expected to get some kind of fee put on us, but that's just guess. So no, we really didn't count on that as being something to be concerned with. We're just glad we beat them.
Yes, sir.
To Mike Burden, you said that you were fired. Did it have anything to do with what you were doing with fighting the union?
I think so. I'm
You
not the
explain?
first one who was fired because of their activity, but they did it in such a way that it was something inconsequential that had to do with something in the employee handbook that you did wrong. And I'm sorry, there you go. I even had a peer review, and that still didn't do any good. So if they want you gone, and I'm so disappointed because my heart and soul was in that company, and I counted myself as one of the hardest working folks there. And there are others that are leaving because they're not being treated fairly, and they're happier places to work. When you spend most of your waking moments working to make a great product, you want to be appreciated, as any of us would. And when you're not, it's just we go find someplace else to work. Now, the money is great. You know, you get those golden handcuffs on, and the benefits are wonderful. But in the past 4 years, we leased 15 different cars from Volkswagen. I believed in supporting my company. This was part of it. It was a great deal for me. We could promote their vehicles out on the road. There's a lot of us that
Do we have a, sorry,
have
Mike,
left.
we got to move on here.
Yes. Thank you.
Connor?
Connor Wolf with the Daily Caller News Foundation. My question is for everyone, including you, Matt. All of you know a lot of different workers who are skeptical of unions, and some of you, by extension, know organizations or business coalitions that may be more skeptical towards unions. Out of all the people you guys know and all the organizations you know, have any of them been invited to the White House summit tomorrow to discuss maybe the more skeptical side of unions or the more business side of labor relations?
No, to my knowledge, no pro-worker organization has been invited to that summit. There's some great organizations, Center for Independent Employees, Russ, take a bow. Great organization that's helped out a couple of the workers here in the panel. myself, National Right to Work. No, I don't think any of us were invited, strangely. Yes, sir. Do you have a question?
Thank you. A question for Ms. Cox. You say in your speaker biography that many of the workers, or some of the workers, faced workplace harassment when the union was coming around. Are you concerned about being here today and engaging in an honest discussion about the pros and cons of unions? Do you feel like you may face further harassment for that?
The harassment I have experienced where we have two buildings. The one building is, basically the one building wants the union. My building does not want it, mostly. When I go to work, I'm pretty much supported almost 100% in my building. Management remains neutral because they want to stay out of trouble. So they remain neutral. I'm not worried about it. I know when I've gone over to the other building to campaign, that's when I've been, people have shown me gestures and blurred their horns at me and made faces and, kind of just been rude to me. But they haven't been, too violent or anything. Although the first time I petitioned for the decertification, a union rep did call my dad and told him that I need to settle what I'm doing and made some mention of people losing their jobs. So, I mean, tell my dad on me. By the way, he's so proud.
It's in the back, in the orange.
Belén Barriga with Telesur. And my question is, we've been in so many rallies and protests and march where there's a lot of people there, and especially unions are the ones that organize this, promising better salaries and also more benefits. Why people keep trusting them?
I can speak for that, at least in terms of the United Farm Workers in California. Every single person that shows up with the United Farm Workers shirt, it's not an actual worker, they're all paid by the union. So in my experience, I've been at dozens of demonstrations in California. Every single person on the side of the union, it's not an actual worker, they've all been paid for, and they are staging this just for PR stunts. In fact, I had at a protest a few months ago, I talked to some of the employees there, employees, so call them. And while the UFW organizer was not around, I tried to talk to him, and he basically said, "Oh, they picked me off of the Coordinate store, and they paid me $100 to come here." So, in my experience, the unions, it's staged, and a lot of the tactics they use are just like a mob or a cartel.
And meanwhile, we organized 1,000 actual ground farm workers last August to protest at the State Labor Board, and every single one of them was an actual worker and very passionate.
And if I may add something, the first protest that the workers did before we got involved as activists, they had over 3,000 farm workers that walked out of their job and they walked down the street. If you look back at history, the biggest protest that Cesar Chavez ever had was 1,000 people. Right here, there was 3,000 real farm workers saying, "We don't want the union, we've had enough."
So my name is Melanie Trotman. I'm with the Wall Street Journal. I'd like to know if you all are generally in the minority, excuse me, in your workplace, and if so, why do you think your coworkers are, maintaining the union? And also, do you see any division politically in the workplace? Unions often say, it's Republicans, Republican lawmakers who don't want unions in the workplace. And I'm wondering if, you see your colleagues split along those lines, the Democrats wanting the union and the Republicans in the workplace not wanting the union.
I would say that we are not, as far as the flight attendants, we are not in the minority for wanting to decertify our union. We got more than 50% of people signing cards saying that they wanted a vote. So that doesn't guarantee that they want to decertify the union, but it does say that we want to vote, we want to say in what we're doing. As far as in the workplace, everyone's very respectful of each other. We work with new people every day, so we are a crew of 4 mostly. We never work the same people, and there's never really that many arguments. And as far as Democrats or Republicans, I don't know.
Jim?
I would say that my colleagues are a vast majority of teachers, particularly in Michigan, are fairly liberal. We are pro-union, and However, we were anti-Michigan Education Association. We weren't, I think Mike mentioned it, we weren't anti-union. We were anti-large, bureaucratic, wasteful union. And so, no, really, politics does not come into play. Within our own district, you know, our group, we're very respectful of one another.
We have time for a couple more. Yes, sir.
I'm Sean Higgins with the Examiner again. I guess this is mostly for, and I'm going to mangle your name, so I'm just going to call you James. But and for anyone else who can answer this question, did you try to use your Beck rights, to limit what you had to pay to the union? And if you did, how did that go?
No, we didn't. Actually, right after we left, we decertified. Michigan did become a right-to-work state, and had Michigan been right-to-work prior to our third attempt, we probably would not have decertified. A good number of us would have just left the union in place and exercised right-to-work and left the union altogether. We did have a couple teachers that did pay only agency fees, but that was just a couple. So no, there was no discussion of that. However, I think being able to decertify our union, we are now able to, as a union, as a group, handle what's going on right now. We have in the school districts where teachers are leaving the Michigan Education Association en masse. It's dividing the workplace. The ones that the teachers that stay in the union and the teachers that exercise right to work, they have clear divides in their school. We had one teacher exercise right to work in our union, and we're very proud that we provide a good product, and there's total freedom of association. They can be in our union or they don't have to be in our union.
Freedom of association. What a crazy idea.
Crazy, isn't it?
One more. I think we have time for one more question. Well, thanks, everyone. I think it's been a great discussion. I'm really proud to sit up here with these workers who are trying really hard to exercise their freedom of association, guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Let's not forget. Just in closing, I will say that it is pretty amazing that private entities like organized labor groups can have carve-outs for things like the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, that people can be forced to associate with them, people can be forced to financially support them. I think it's time that we rethink labor relations in the United States and make it a more free, more open, and more fair system. And we hope today that this will help spur that discussion. So thank you all very much, and thanks for the panelists. Let's hear it for them.
We'll take a 15-minute break, so if people want to get coffee or go to the washroom or stretch your legs, and we'll meet back in here again at 10:50. We will be hearing from some workers who've seen the downside of excessive occupational licensing. But if we could have Isis and Bill come up, and I'd like to introduce this next panel. Moderating this panel will be Derek Khanna, who is the policy lead for Lincoln Labs, which is a Silicon Valley-based technology activist and lobbying firm. And he's done a lot of work on the concept of both permissionless innovation and permissionless work, the notion that you should not need the government's permission in order to hold a job. And he's a perfect person to moderate this panel, which features several workers who've been hurt by the government's excessive preoccupation with occupational licensing. So Derek, take it away.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And are we still waiting on Ms. Loving here? Should we just...
I'd say let's get started with Isis and Bill, and then when she comes up.
Sure. So lovely Isis here has been braiding hair for more than 30 years, as you can see. And in 1997, 7 Dallas police officers raided her business and hauled her off in handcuffs for the crime of braiding hair without a cosmetology license. The education license had no connection with hair braiding. They don't even teach hair braiding in cosmetology school, but yet that was what she was in trouble for. And in 2007, there were legislative changes that allowed ISIS to legally braid hair, but forbid her from teaching hair braiding in her Dallas shop. The officials told her that she would have to attend 2,250 hours of instruction and open a 2,000 square foot facility to comply with the Texas rules. And I'm sure we'll hear all about that. And let's jump here. And Mr. Bill Main here leads Segway tours in Washington, D.C. You can see his hat there, which says Segs in the City. If you haven't seen his hat, it's pretty fantastic. I kind of wish he had one for all of us, but he does not. And he guides tourists around America's capital on Segways, giving them a scenic view of the city and educating them along as they pass. But until recently, his activities were illegal, as Washington, D.C. required that all tour guides pay several $100s in licensing fees and pass a 100-question exam in order to legally guide tours. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that as well. So why don't you start us off by talking a little bit about some of the issues that you dealt with the D.C. police and D.C. regulations and your company?
Sure, Derek, I can do that. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for affording me the opportunity to speak with you today. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to do so. Segs in the City was established by my wife, Tonya, and myself back in 2004 in Annapolis, Maryland. And we set up a business there using Segways to tour the old city of Annapolis. And if you've been to Annapolis, you'll know it to be a historic city of some importance in the nation. We soon, however, saw the opportunity to expand that business to Washington, D.C., and we did so. And so in 2005, we set up an operation here in Washington also. Not to be deterred with expansion, we saw another opportunity at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, the opportunity to do Segway tours of the Civil War battlefield in Gettysburg. And so we moved to set up an operation there also. In addition to that, by the end of 2005, we'd also established our Baltimore facility. So by the end of 2005, we had 4 operations going, being Annapolis, the original, Washington, D.C., Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Civil War battlefield, and Baltimore inner harbor and historic districts. This all went very well until we found out. At Gettysburg, if you wish to set up a business to operate on the battlefield, you are dealing with the National Park Service, and they will grant you a concession license to operate your business. So our business, Segs in the City, applied for such a license and indeed was granted one. However, all you can do is take people around the battlefield. You are not permitted to speak. This is the national park legislation or regulations. To speak, you must pass by 80% a 120 multiple choice question about battlefield history, and it seems other things. You had to wear the designated uniform nominated by the National Park Service, and you had to wear a badge that identified yourself as a National Park Service guide. This immediately caused us a great deal of concern because we didn't have such a license to speak. We then said, well, let us have one. They said, oh no, we only conduct the test every 2 or 3 years, depending on the number of guides we feel we need within the park. And we said, but hang on, we're an outside business bringing people in the park. We're not interested in capturing any visitors of the park that are already here. Our business was predicated on you make a reservation in advance and we meet you at the park and take you on your tour. They said, doesn't matter. You can certainly take the people around, but do not speak. Well, we thought, no, that's not fair. That's possibly an infringement of our First Amendment rights. So we continued. We just went on our merry way doing our tours, and of course speaking. Well, then the Park Service got wind of this, particularly from their existing registered guides, who saw us as a threat to their cartel, and so they planted someone on one of our tours. And sure enough, there was a park ranger dressed in civilian clothes. But it's a bit like an FBI agent. You can pick them from a long way away. However, there he was, and he went on the tour. Now, it so happened my wife, Tonya, was conducting that tour, and she saw this. However, she thought, no, we're going to take this on. And we took them on a tour all the way around the park. Next day, we got a call from the Park Service saying they're withdrawing our permit to act in the park. And we said, why? They said, because you were speaking. We said, well, that's not very fair. They said, but you were speaking, and that's against the regulation. Then into the scene comes the Institute for Justice. I presume you all know who Institute for Justice are, but for those that may not, Institute for Justice is a libertarian organization that provides free legal services to people that meet their criteria about challenging the government's right to legislate or regulate certain industries or certain parts of our daily life. And one of their pillars is the First Amendment. And they saw this as a First Amendment argument. It so happened that at the same time, they were supporting another guide who was operating in Philadelphia, doing walking tours. And the city of Philadelphia has legislation that says you cannot do walking tours without a license. And the same thing, you have to pass a test before you can speak about the sights of Philadelphia. And IJ took up their case and took it to the local district court. However, the case was left on the table at the district court because when the representatives of the city attended the case, they said, oh, we don't intend to enforce this rule anyway. So the judge just said, well, what am I doing here? Just go away. And he didn't dismiss the case, but he just left the case without decision. IJ were not satisfied with that, so we approached them, they approached us and said, well, how about we take up your case? And we said, yeah, let's go for the national parks. They said, no, we want to take the case up in Washington because Washington have the same rules as Philadelphia. Washington have the similar rules to the national park. We want to challenge first the case in Washington, and then if we win, it'll give us a strong hand to come back and challenge the National Park Service on the same grounds as the case in Washington. And so the scene was set. Washington required a guide to be 18 years of age, be able to read, speak, and write English, be of good character, that is, have a clean police record, and to pass a 100-question multiple-choice test about the landmarks and sites in the District of Columbia. In Washington, we had another rule also. You can be a guide as long as you do not speak if you have not got this license. What you can do, of course, is have a recorded message. So I can take a recording with me and have the recording tell you all about everything. That's okay. Do not need a license. But if you open your mouth, you need a license. In default, you can be sent to jail for 90 days and we can fine you $300 or both. And we said, no, that's not good enough. So we teamed up with IJ and took the case to the district court. The district court ruled against us. They said the city does have the right to further its obligations to protect the public. And so they ruled against us. Well, IJ rubbed their hands together and said, okay, we're going to the appeals court. And so we went to the Court of Appeal here in Washington. At the same time, down in New Orleans, we had a similar case where a group were doing walking tours around the old city of New Orleans, and they too had gone to court with the support of IJ for the right to be able to speak on their guided tours. First instance in New Orleans, they lost the case. So IJ rubbed their hands together and said, okay, we're going to appeal this one. And they did. And they lost the appeal. It was held by the Court of Appeals on I think it's the 5th District down there, that the city had the right to do this. That decision was in front of us when we went to our Court of Appeals case. Here in the district, the court ruled unanimously in our favor and said, we disregard the decision of the appeals court in New Orleans because they did not consider the legal implications of the case. And so now the case stands in our favor, and the city has had to abandon its law that you must have a license to speak. So we won the right to conduct our tours without a license on a First Amendment case, which was fully supported by the Court of Appeals here in the District of Columbia. It rests with the city to appeal that, and at one stage they were going to appeal that. That meant it would have been a Supreme Court case, because there was a decision in New Orleans on the one side, a decision in Washington on the other side. And this is good stuff for the Supreme Court to be able to resolve. However, no action has been taken to the Supreme Court at this stage. At this stage, we are allowed to conduct our tours, speak freely, without any fear of penalty or imprisonment. Had we not won that case, then we would have been faced, we the business, would have been faced with the unlikelihood of being able to get the type of guides we use in our business. We're a seasonal business. We look for guides who are usually history students, and when I say students, I mean they're college kids. They're not people looking for full-time jobs, because we cannot guarantee full-time jobs. We only operate for 9 months of the year. So we rely on college kids. We rely on table servers at restaurants who are working evening shifts but want to do something during the day. We rely on people that have unusual shift hours to work who want to make extra money. This licensing law that existed in DC required them to acquire the license, not us, the business. It was them, the individual, or those the individuals that had to acquire the license. They had to pay the $200 fee per year. They had to sit the test. They had to get the clean record. They had to do everything to be able to come to work for us. Well, the average college kid isn't going to do that. They're just going to say, oh, I go and find a job doing something else, because they want about 6 or 8 weeks' work. The average table server at a restaurant isn't going to do that, because they're going to, why am I bothering to spend all this money, do all this stuff, and I might be out of a job in a few weeks because they don't need so many guides or whatever. So had these rules remained in place, we would have found it extremely difficult to get the class of guide we get right now. On the other hand, we would have had to hire guides from the Professional Guides Association, which exists here in Washington, and who might have been the primary movers for this piece of legislation, because, again, we appeared a threat. Now, we pay college kid money. Yeah, they get $10 or $12 an hour to run around town on a Segway. They think this is great fun. They pick up gratuities and tips at least double that. So now we've got college kids running around on Segways, having fun, dressed in pink shirts, making $25 an hour. They think this is great. I want one of these professional guides, $40 an hour. Oops, a significant impact on the business. So we are well and truly glad that we won this case, because not only are we giving college kids an opportunity to earn some money for the summer, we're being able to deliver our product at a reasonable cost. And we are getting the kind of guide we want, because we look for young, happy-go-lucky, entertaining, multi-language people that can conduct the tour. We don't want 50-year-old, grey-haired, sorry sir, stick in the mud, dry historians doing our tours. That's not the kind of business we are. Yeah, no offense. But, so we're glad we won that case, because the impact on us could have been significant. Now, the impact at national parks, because there's been no challenge and those rules are in place, is we no longer operate in the park. So we had to withdraw. That cost us tens of thousands of dollars in revenue for the business, all because they won't let us speak. So yes, I welcome the opportunity to speak to people that want to hear something about what is going on with our overreaching legislation by our government instrumentalities and authority. I hope I provided you with an insight as to a little bit of the experience, and another case of where our rights as individuals is being eaten away by people who are in place to look after us and provide us with the environment in which we should be able to earn our living freely. We should be able to employ the people we choose. We don't have to be told, employ an 18-year-old. Much as we like college kids, we certainly don't offer those under 18 the job, because that places an unreasonable burden on them and maybe have some some legal implications if should anything happen. We don't have to be told we need people that can read and write and speak English. We don't have to be told that the person we're employing is not a criminal. We can work all that out for ourselves. It's not too hard. And we certainly don't want to tell the prospective guide that he or she cannot speak. So this was quite an overreach by the City of Washington, and in the case of the national parks, by them too, and by New Orleans and by Philadelphia, trying to stop a small enterprise making a living. I thank you for your attention.
A fascinating anecdote, and your story is amazing. I guess one question I have for you before I turn to some of the other guys is the explanation behind this nanny state approach, the 100-question exam, is the idea that the market can't separate good tour guides from bad tour guides.
But that's the premise. Well, the 100 questions don't do that either, because they'll ask you a question about something that's nowhere near what you're doing. And again, our business is a very defined track we follow. For example, there are rules in the city that tell us where we can and cannot ride our segways. We comply with those. There are rules by the national parks who control the National Mall that tell us where we can and cannot ride our segways. We comply with that. Our business is about taking tourists to this city, to the White House, to the Capitol, and to the monuments on the National Mall. We don't really need to know what the building is on the corner of M Street and 23rd Street, if there is one. But that's one of the questions. Where is such and such a building? Well, we don't particularly care, because we don't see it. Very few questions about who designed the Roosevelt Memorial. No questions about what's the significance of the columns on the Lincoln Memorial. No questions about why are there 19 military men at the Korean Memorial. These are the things we deal with, nothing to do with the corner of M and 23rd or anything else. So the 100 questions on the test that they offer have very little impact on what we do.
And what's the impact upon your business when you have like a bad Yelp review?
Oh, well, there we are.
Not saying that's ever happened to you.
I guess there was a time when someone had to decide whether someone's a good guide. Today, we all know what the social media is all about. We all know what the internet's all about. That is the one thing that judges us. If you look at our website or our record on TripAdvisor, yeah, we have 5-star reviews. We have many of them. We have 2 bad ones. And one of them was that old Australian that does the touring. Okay, I can accept that one.
And how do the $40 national tour guide, union guys, how do they compare? What are their ratings?
Well, they do the test. Give them their due. They know their stuff. But we're not about knowing history in the detail that they would espouse it. I mean, when a tour bus comes here, the way that operates, a tour bus arrives and they engage one of these, what we call step-on guides. They step on the bus, they give a narration as the bus drives around the various sites, and then they step off again. This is what these guides do. They also take walking parties. And as I said before, they're most unsuitable for Segway guides. We tried one, just to deviate a bit, we tried one in Gettysburg, and the guy couldn't do it, couldn't ride the Segway. Oh, we couldn't get off to a very good start there. So, yeah, we've got to be, we pick the young ones for a reason, because they are adaptable, they can do it. Some of us here may have a little trouble doing it.
Great. Well, I'd like to welcome Sabina Loving here, who has a tax preparation service, and I'm sure we're going to hear all about it. But first, I wanted to hear a little bit from Iris about hair braiding salon and her experiences with the. And this is a major issue. Cosmetology licenses are in every state in the country. As far as I'm aware, none of them actually teach hair braiding, but they all apply to hair braiding. And also, a lot of people who want to get hair braiding, and you can touch upon this more, my understanding is sometimes they just want hair braiding. They don't want those other services that you would maybe be required to get. So let's go through your story. What happened to you?
Yes, thank you, and thank all of you. Happy New Day is what I say in the greeting of every day. And I want to say that God's timing is always right. I feel like a young queen ready and waiting for Christmas and this gift that's coming. And I'm ready to open up the box to see what's in it. I want to thank James and Heritage Foundation. And I also want to thank all the people in Texas that really helped me open up this Pandora box of freedom that I am now experiencing. Senator Royce West, House Representative Craig Goldman, Institute for Justice, IJ. I really want to thank you, Arif, if you're watching. Also want to thank Greg Abbott, who is Governor Greg Abbott, who signed the bill, and Judge Sam Sparks, who said regulating ancestral braiding is absolutely unconstitutional. I want to thank you. And I want to thank my children who have been very patient with me. They were babies and youngsters. My oldest was 11 when this happened to me, and my baby was on my back. I want to thank my mother, and I want to thank my dear community for believing in me, and those that said, get a license, get a license, get a license, and went on the other side, and those that stayed on the side of economic empowerment and opportunity with me. Oh my God, I'm an entrepreneur. My name is Isis Brantley. And I'm an inventor. I'm a pioneer in my state. I started the first natural hair salon in Dallas, Texas. Natural at that time was very repelling. It wasn't a good word. So that was in 1979. You said you wouldn't let 50-year-olds work with you because I'm 57. No, you do the math. But anyway, I just want to say that I was on the cutting edge of something really huge in Texas, and it just went bad for me. I worked as a natural hair ambassador for Dallas. I am an educator, and I took women from all walks of life off the street and said, come, let me show you how to make some money. You know, I transition their lives from welfare to well-being very easily, because this gift is a passed down from generation to generation. My mother braided, my grandmother braided, everybody in my family were natural braiders, and these ladies were able to feed their families, and I'm not a food bank. They were able to put clothes on their children's backs and roofs over their heads, and I did this only by means of something that I loved. I found this gift. I dropped out of college, which wasn't something that my mom wanted me to do, but I come from a line of entrepreneurs. I dropped out of college and I started to exercise the art of ancestral braiding. The industry was very young at the time, so all of American hair braiders are under attack, and the cosmetology industry does not teach the art of ancestral braiding. So I cultivated the community and I got a name for myself, the Queen of Braids. And what happened was some of the industry insiders found out they were cosmetology schools, and they took my name to the state of Texas, which was in Austin, Texas, and said, we found somebody breaking the law. You got to do something about it. So in 1995, they sent me a letter saying that we are aware of you, and we know that you are breaking the law. So I said, oh, wow, what is this? You know, that was the scariest thing ever, getting a letter from the state of Texas. I'm thinking that, you know, I'm just in my community cultivating and educating and passing down this gift to the next generation. I didn't think I was breaking a law. So in 1997, they thought, okay, we're just going to surprise her. They came into my salon. This is the year that I opened up my business. I came out of my home, which most braiders all over the country are home braiders first. You know, they cater to their church and they cater to their community. Well, I thought I would be creating a great opportunity for my community, a little lily in the valley, because I'm in the poor, economical, disenfranchised community, and I wanted to open up something to make them feel happy and good about themselves. That year I opened up was the year that the state of Texas sent 7 cops to my salon, unannounced, 2 undercover, came in, flashing badges, saying you're under arrest for braiding hair. I thought it was a joke. And I asked the lady, she said, well, Isis, you're going to jail. You really are going to jail. I was like, but what about my children? They're in school. Can I just take a minute to call them? And she gave me the opportunity, but she also gave me a good lesson in this new journey I was about to take. So I had my gele on, my head wrap. She said, you're going to have to take your head wrap off when you get there, and I need you to comply. And I'll put the cuffs on very lightly so you won't feel them. But I felt something inside of me just go out the door. 20 years of my life was snatched away from me. My babies, I didn't know what they were going to do at that point. They shut my business down. They put an injunction on it. I became homeless. People in the community love me. Like, they know that I am an advocate for women, because the women in my community are the ones that braid hair. You take the jobs away from them. You starve the children. So someone came up and said, you can stay at my house. Got a lawyer, had a trial. The funniest thing is the state of Texas videotaped the arrest. And when I had my trial, my lawyer asked for the video, and some reason why it mysteriously came up missing. I got a lawyer, and we fought the state of Texas. The state of Texas sued me. I countersued the state of Texas, and this went on for 10 years. I'm in my kitchen and my garage braiding hair because I didn't know if I could keep feeding my kids and if I could go back to my shop. So finally, my lawyer said, you can go back to your shop and keep doing what you're doing, and we'll handle this in court. In 2007, the state of Texas grandfathered me in. They created a new law which read Texas barber. That is what the license read, Texas barber. Well, I'm not a barber. I don't use sharp instruments. I don't cut faces and heads and use things like that, scissors and things like that for barbering. So I didn't understand why we got the license that said Texas barber. So anyway, I was grandfathered. I kind of felt good about that, but I said, hey, you guys, I'm an educator. I've already trained over 1,500 women in the state. The state of Texas is the institution that gives these licensing for people to go to work, and they hadn't trained but 4 people in the last 7 years since the law was in effect. So this 35-hour curriculum they kind of got from me at all the hearings so they could know what to put down and say these are the requirements for anybody in the schools, the government schools teaching the art of hair braiding. So the people had to go by that. Well, the people were not wanting to go to the government schools. They wanted to come to my Institute of Ancestral Braiding because they knew that they would be taught sanitation, which is as much as you drop a comb, you sanitize it. When you go to the next client, you wash your hands. I mean, how difficult is that? They wanted to give us 17 hours of sanitation. I mean, what happened back in ancient Africa when we didn't have these laws regulating our culture? So I had to deal with, everybody being afraid. They kind of put my business out of business. People were afraid to come to me. They were the insiders. I call them the industry insiders, the cartel. They posted my picture up on the wall in their schools, and they told people, if you don't want to go to jail, you don't want to go to this lady. So it kind of hindered my business for 20 years. And this industry is suffering globally, all over America. Hair braiders in America are under attack. It's not just Texas. I'm very grateful that we've set precedents for a new generation of hair entrepreneurs, natural hair entrepreneurs, which is by the way, $500 trillion industry today. Back during my time, you have to look back and see those that put forth, the trailblazers that put forth the industries that we're embracing now for the future. This is the future now. Now, I started back in '79. But anyway, it's a big market for those that want to practice ancestral braiding. It's a big market for those who want to make their own products. People like Dark and Lovely and Just For Me, and those companies are losing millions of dollars now that we are embracing our natural hair. This is hair that is forbidden in the country, forbidden on the jobs. You can't be seen in public like this, so why not start your own business so you can be seen in public like you want to be seen in public? If you want to embrace something indigenous and old and ancient as ancestral braiding, then you do. You be creative like I am, and you create hairstyles for people that are losing their hair, people that are suffering from cancer, people that are going through their own issues that still want to embrace something that gives them a sense of identity. I just want to say that I am grateful for winning my case after 20 years, but what do you do when the red tape is cut? Occupational licensing, it restricts the upward mobility of people who just want to earn an honest living. All I wanted to do is braid in my community, teach it to the next generation, create jobs, and be a part of the American dream. Everybody wants a part of that dream. But my rights were violated. My 14th Amendment, due process, the right to earn an honest living, that was violated. And my children were pretty put off. All of them are older now. My baby girl is 20, and she dropped out of college. My 3 boys went to Full Sail. Well, one went to USC. He dropped out of college. I can't afford to help them. My 2 boys went to Full Sail in Florida. They dropped out of college. But my oldest daughter has a master's degree, and she's a film director, and she graduated from Columbia University. But guess what? She came out owing $350,000. How can I help my babies? this is serious. This is serious because I'm just one ancestral braider in the state of these United States of America. There are others that are facing the same crime, braiding without a cosmetology license, when the cosmetology board does not. And they'll tell you, our instructors don't teach braiding. You just have to go somewhere else and learn that. Oh, we don't know how to do afros. You got to go somewhere else and learn that. That's not what we teach. But I don't use sodium hydroxide. I found no reason to go and comply to their regulations because I don't use those chemicals to fashion, beauty, and art. So I'm just saying, this is a movement of millions of dollars, and the economy could be making a lot of money. Like, I want to help American economy. Entrepreneurs are the backbones of this economy, American economy. So why can't we just allow people to make a choice of what occupation they want? I didn't want to do anything other than what I've always been doing, sitting on the back porches of my community, braiding and twisting and locking hair. And now it's a multi-billion industry. What else can I say? I need some of those millions of dollars because now that I'm free, I have to find a way to put my pieces back together. I am a brand. I'm a brand just like Vidal Sassoon. I could have thrived very well like Tony and Guy. All of these great independent business owners. But my life was stolen away from me for 20 years. So I'm 57 now, so I was a beautiful 37 at the time, and young and vibrant and innovative. But that left me, and a lot of issues with me came about, just not knowing how my life is going to turn out. I just got freed this year. Governor Greg Abbott signed the bill June 8th. I'm free, but to go where and to do what? I'm free to pick up my pieces, and I shall, because I am a brand, and I know that people look to me all over this country to help them solve issues with occupational licensing restrictions that target poor people and people that are innovative and inventors and those that just want the occupation that they just want. And why not be able to? I'm not saying that if you want to be a doctor, that you should not be regulated. I'm not saying that if you want to be a cosmetologist, and I hope the cosmetologists hear me, because if I did chemicals and I'm mixing up some scientific chemicals together to put on someone's scalp, of course I would want to know how to do that. But that's not what I do. I practice my culture, and that's very dear to me.
Next, we're going to hear from Sabina Loving and her tax preparation business. And did you also get arrested?
No, not yet anyway. No, I am a small business owner, and I own an independent tax preparation agency. So a little bit about me. I've worked about 10 years in the financial service industry as a regulatory accountant. And when the economic downturn hit my industry, it hit my industry hard. So I decided that I was tired of being acquisitioned into different positions or working my way up the proverbial corporate ladder to have to start over again every 5 years. I have a master's degree, and I also have an undergrad degree in business administration. So I did everything I was supposed to do. I was supposed to go to school. I was supposed to get an education and realize my American dream. So when I got tired of corporate America, I decided I wanted to own my own business. So I was doing taxes for my friends and family you know, just because nobody wants to deal with taxes. I I uncannily like taxes. I like numbers. So I saw an opportunity, especially in my community on the south side of Chicago, where I saw low-income people actually, I felt like being taken advantage of by the big tax prep firms, where they would have something simple and pay $500 to have their taxes prepared. So I saw an opportunity in the market for me to serve my community while educating them at the same time on taxes. So I opened up this tax prep firm. As I opened up the firm, and I prided myself in offering affordable tax services. So in low minority income neighborhoods, most of their tax return, if they're working a minimum wage job, comes from a credit that they're entitled to called the Earned Income Tax Credit. And depending on their household size, the amount of money they make, that can be a substantial boost to their economic condition once a year. And when I saw that they were paying $500, $600, and sometimes $700, I thought that it was ludicrous. And I wanted to be able to educate them on what their real tax liability was without robbing them once a year. And I felt that's what the big tax firms were doing. But then as my business began to grow, because taxes is really about relationships. People trust you, they come to you year after year after year. And it's actually a business that grows in stages. One year you may start off with 20 clients. Somebody likes you, they recommend their aunt, their uncle, their mother, their brother to you. So it began to grow. I began this business in 2010, and I incorporated it. I opened a business actually in my community right across the street from my home. So I basically had to walk maybe 25 steps to my office. But I wanted to be visible in my community. I wanted people to know who I was, where I lived. And I wasn't just gonna be a fly-by-night business. I wanted to be this staple in my community. My goal was to teach other people how to prepare taxes, because when there's a saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But when you teach or educate somebody on how to do something, you empower them. And I was able to do that for some of the residents in my community. Mind you, most of tax preparation industry is seasonal. People pop up from January to April. Some of those people you never see again. They're just in it for those 4 months. I want my business, and I still continue to want my business, to be someplace that people can call me after April 15th has expired. All my clients don't get a tax return, but the ones that do get a tax return, I want them to spend it more than just on the flat screen television or the new car. And people in the retail industry know the buying habits of the African American community. They feel like as soon as they get this tax return, then they're going to spend it. So part of my mission is to also educate them and say, hey, if you're getting a tax return, first, you're probably paying too much, and you could use the bulk of that money during the course of the year rather than at one time of the year. But if that is, your strategy to get this one lump sum of money, then plan on doing something with it, saving it for retirement, open an IRA or something to better yourself as life goes on. And as I was doing this and I was gearing up my business began to grow. The IRS decided that they wanted to license tax return preparers. And taxes has always been something that anybody can do themselves. They go to tax prep services because most people really don't understand taxes. They don't want to be bothered with taxes. So that's why it is an industry. But the IRS said that, we're going to license you tax return preparers, and you have to take this test and pass this test and get our permission to prepare taxes. As a growing business and an entrepreneur, every single dime is accounted for. I have scarce resources, and I have to choose wisely what I'm spending my money on, because I didn't have a business line of credit or anything like that. Everything that happens in my business comes out of my pocket. I was employing people seasonally, and when they said that, not only was I required to go take this exam, pass this exam, I had to pay for a prep course to pass the exam, pay for PT fees annually, and that's a prepared tax identification number to let them know who I am. Pay for that for my employees. They would have to pass this licensing exam, and that was adding hundreds or thousands of dollars per employee to my bottom line. Now, if I'm priding myself as a business that's going to make my services more affordable, if those costs go into my bottom line, I would have no other choice but to add that in the form of higher prices to my clients. That's something that I did not want to do, and I refused to do because it was uncalled for. And there was no evidence that if I took and passed this test and my employees passed the test, that they were going to protect consumers any more than they already do with the hundreds of laws that they currently have on the book. So that's why I sued the IRS with the help of IJ, who represented me again for free, and me and two co-plaintiffs won the case in the district court and on appeal in the DC Circuit. And unfortunately, I and the two co-complainants, we're just a small number of the 300,000 independent entrepreneurs that these laws would have affected.
That's incredible.
One of the things that's most interesting to me is that all three of you are providing an added value. The Segway Tours is interesting, innovative market model. I'm sure there are some people who don't want to walk around all day. I've been on bus tours. I don't find them to be that beneficial. And so it's something that's new and interesting, which is what you want to see. And the fact that your company's been successful within the marketplace indicates that consumers also feel that way. And as far as tax preparation goes, my understanding is that a lot of people don't actually take advantage of all the benefits that they get, particularly the CHIP program and some other programs for the lower income community. So the fact that you're able to help them is just fantastic. And as far as ancestral hair braiding, there's really nothing that's available for a lot of these communities. It's interesting to me that we have hundreds of years of experience of tailors, providing suits for men or shirts for men, and cobblers creating shoes for men, and all these other male industries, and then there's no form of regulation. But as far as florists and cosmetology, two professions that are traditionally more gender normed as female, those are under a very heavy regulation. It doesn't make that much sense to me. And I think one thing that we should keep in mind is that for these three stories that are relative successes, I mean, their companies have been successful, but they went through hell along the way. there's another 100 companies or 1,000 companies that you'll never hear from, or startups that had an idea to do ancestral hair braiding or something completely unrelated to that, but still under the cosmetology licenses, and they were dissuaded from launching their business. So this is really the tip of the iceberg of what's happening in all these different sectors of the economy.
I have something to say. I have not been working in my field for 20 years. They would not allow me to be a school. There's no such thing as an ancestral braiding school in this country. I was able to create a separate entity in Texas. Now it reads barbering school, cosmetology school, and now there is an ancestral school. This is the first ever. This has never happened. So I have not been able to work successfully in that business because I couldn't be a school in Texas, but now I can. And hopefully I can join the Heritage Foundation, IJ, to go across the country to help people understand that you have an economic right to earn an honest living in all of the fields and trades that we choose. But in particularly, because this is hair industry, you know, look how handsome you are. You know, everyone gets in the mirror and makes themselves beautiful. So this is a huge industry, and I'm ready to take on I'm ready to do my work. And this is the opportunity for me to say, I want to see a franchise in Ireland. I want to see a franchise in Europe. I want to see a franchise in South Africa. This is the opportunity that we have now.
I think we should clap for that entrepreneur.
Yes.
Okay. If you have any questions in the audience, we've got a few minutes here.
Yeah, this is for, my name is Sean Higgins. I'm with the Washington Examiner. This is for anybody up there who can answer it or has any insight on it. To the extent that any of you had a contact or interaction with elected officials, people who are responsible for the laws that create the regulations that you're pushing up against being on the books, what sort of reaction did you get from them? Did it appear to you as though they believed that they genuinely were protecting consumers, or did you get the impression that they simply were acting on behalf of whatever it was, the industry that was that they thought you were taking business away from, or some other reaction?
It was the Republicans that helped me. I knocked at the door and they might not have noticed who I was, but they definitely don't like government regulations either. So that's who helped me. And I think I'm just thankful. I'm very thankful.
Thanks. I'm Salim Firth. I work here at the Heritage Foundation. I'm curious, Derek, you might want to say a few words on this, or panelists, if you have something to add. I think there's a really interesting distinction between laws that sort of we all have to follow. So like, Bill, if you're giving Segway tours, you have to sort of abide by traffic rules. You can't go through red lights. And there's a law that you have to follow ex post versus needing permission beforehand. And you know, is there some distinction? Is it easier to follow the laws that are just, they apply to everybody, that doesn't block you as a business, versus the permission? Are those similar? Maybe talk about the similarities and differences between the law versus the permission slip approach to government.
Anyone want to touch that?
Well, we would all, I'm sure, understand that for the community to prosper, we must have laws. But laws should have a significant or a meaningful point. For example, stopping at the red traffic light. Well, the result of not stopping can be a little bit of a problem for a lot of people. And so clearly the need for a law such as that is obvious. However, when you get down to some of these, as we say, laws that tend to infringe on an individual's right to work or right to establish a business, then a lot of these are driven by parochial interest, as we referred to. We have guild associations for guides. well, they've got a lot to protect. And laws that are initiated to protect any such institutions should not really be promulgated. It's not fair on the entrepreneur to find that they are facing a law that was actually brought about by an interested or vested party. And in the case of a lot of these, what we'll call fringe laws, this is the case. They're motivated by someone who has an interest beyond a reasonable interest as an entrepreneur.
Two things I'll add to that. I think, these laws that apply to these specific occupations are some of the most pernicious because people don't go into those occupations to disrupt those industries very often. And so you almost don't hear how bad some of these rules and regulations are, whereas rules and laws that apply to everyone equally, there has to be some level of accountability. We obviously still have some ridiculous rules and regulations, but either the prosecutors don't enforce it or sometimes they get repealed.
Okay. In my situation, again, as far as tax preparation is concerned, the income tax system was designed for it to be a self-reporting system. Okay. The licensing scheme that the IRS tried to enact was in the favor of big franchises. And it did not apply to everybody equally. So if I was a CPA, if I was an attorney, then I would need a license. Okay. Or tax preparers who were supervised by CPAs or attorneys would not need a license. So it was not being enforced equally. And that's what I found very unfair about it. Because if Jackson Hewitt or H&R Block, to mention a few, were to have to pay for these licensing for their tax preparers, they could afford to. They got lots of money. But I could not afford that. So as a growing business, and I'm still in the infancy stage of my business because it's just now 5 years old. So in business, most businesses either fail or succeed in the first 5 years. I found it just wasn't easy, and they were trying to run me and 300,000 other small mom and pop tax businesses out of business. And where were our customers going to go but to them? So if a law is not equally applicable to the entire body of industry, then I don't think that it's fairly executed or applied.
One other thing I'd add is often we talk about occupational licensing, it's almost, well, we have this licensing system or we have nothing. And, we don't want nothing. But that's not how it works. We have contract law, we have tort law. If ISIS does a terrible job at our hair braiding and one of her patients somehow ends up injured.
That's right.
We have, battery, criminal law, we got tort law up the wazoo. It could be the end of your business, not to mention the reputational damage, that stuff. If hair braider causes serious harm would probably be
And that was their fear, exactly. And I totally respect laws. I was reared that way. But the reason they were wanting to regulate me was because they were giving me the same law restrictions and requirements as a cosmetologist. And that's different. If I was going to be a veterinarian, do I have to go become a MD and learn how to be a doctor before I'm able to work on animals? That's my thing. Like, it's the hair industry, but you don't grow hair that spirals like your DNA, that curls and is woolly. You don't know how to talk about it, so you can't educate on it. Like, how do you teach something that you don't do? I don't understand. So I'm all about laws, but that was just unfair for them to put me out of business for something that they don't even practice or do. So I'm all about laws. Like, I'm not saying someone sent a notice to me when this happened to me in '97, and I had a trial, and it was from the sisters that the organization that deliver babies, the midwifery organization. And she said, I don't understand why you have to have a law to breed when we don't even need a law to deliver breech babies. There's no certification or licensing we can deliver breech babies without a certification. So she was very upset about that, and that's my thing. Like, all I want to do is make a living. That's it. I just want to earn an honest living. They regulated me out of business. I lost over $5 million. I need to know and feel my prosperity. Where magically is that coming back? I'm older now, Yep. I don't have 20 more years. I'll be 76 years old at that point. No.
Welcome to the club.
One more question.
Center for Worker Freedom. You hear stories occasionally in the news about a kid trying to sell lemonade on the sidewalk, which we all used to do, and the authorities come and shut them down. Do you feel stories like yours are having a negative effect on the entrepreneurial spirit all the way down to little kids? Do they see this? Do they see what you're going through and say, why should I bother? It's too much trouble to start my own business. And how much is that costing us as a society? Thank you.
It's really hindering the future entrepreneurs. Like, I come from a line of entrepreneurs, and we sold lemonade and popcorn as 6, 7-year-olds. You don't see people doing that anymore. The vendors on the streets in Atlanta. Nobody wants to be run out of their businesses. Like, you're teaching the next generation that it's not okay to become an entrepreneur. Everybody needs to go to college and come out in debt. And that's not what we want. We want the government to get out the way, cut the red tape, and let us go to work. And that's what we're teaching our babies. All 5 of my children are entrepreneurs. My daughter makes films on the side, and she works because she has to work to pay $350,000 back. But my other 4 children, my 20-year-old is in Sweden right now. She's a music major. She created her own, she went to college, she left California a couple of weeks ago, and now she got her band, and she's ready to do her thing. So we want to create. Entrepreneurs are the backbones of American economy. I gotta keep saying that.
I want to add to that. We live in a country where from an early age, we're taught that if you work hard for enough at something, you can have anything that you desire. My desire was to become independent of corporate America. I did not want to depend on a trader on the floor that traded on the wrong side of a bond to determine my destiny or whether I was going to retire, or some executive that decided to hide a related party transaction and close my business down after, close my career down after 12 years, and I've developed some tenure, and have to go back home to my kids and my grandkids and say, well, there's no money to retire. And when I decided to own my own business, I did everything that we are taught. That you educate yourself, you learn business, you develop a business plan, and then you work hard to achieve whatever your American dream is. I know a lot of wealthy people that their grandfather drove around a hot dog truck to factories. And now they have generational wealth because of that one individual. So why have we become a country where regulation, it is so overregulated that the American dream is out of reach. I want my children and my children's children to have something one day that they will have generational wealth. I'm supposed to leave something for them. And that's all I'm trying to do. And when something threatens my ability to do that, I'm outraged. And everybody in this room or that lives in the United States of America needs to be outraged. There is no doubt that we need laws. I'm a law-abiding citizen. But when those laws are anti-competitive and create barriers to entry, then there's a problem. And the United States of America was founded on small businesses because you have to start somewhere. The small businesses become big businesses if they are allowed to grow and mature.
Great, we'll leave it at that.
I have two quick questions. I started a part-time tax business in 2010, and I guess in the next year, the very next year, we got a letter saying exactly what you said, and I didn't understand why. I was so excited because I was a full-time professor, and I had 4 or 5 children, and I needed this extra money, right, to help my kids because pay for all their school supplies, public school supplies. And the next year, I remember getting that letter. You know, the first year we did, we had like 40 customers, and myself and my wife at the time, we were so excited for the possibilities of the next year. And although I heard about about your case and how that changed, but I was so hurt and I wonder how many people like me were basically stifled out of this economic opportunity to help other people not get ripped off by these large corporations. And could you respond to that? And to Ms. Bentley, I read several of your articles regarding that were like in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and Cosmopolitan, and they talked about the natural hair industry being at these billions of dollars, and a lot of the chemical companies, the relaxing companies, are losing money. And these African American entrepreneurs, women, are now creating their own natural products and servicing themselves. And what do you see in that as far as the future and your relationship to Erykah Badu?
I'll answer your question. First of all, you should go back to doing what you were doing. Because it takes us to educate us, okay? And until we do, you know, the lack or miseducation hurts, and that's what the big tax prep firms count on. It would have affected 300,000 independent tax prep companies. You're saying that if you and your wife stopped, then you were one that licensing scheme maybe scared out of business. But I will tell you to just, you know, go back to doing what you were doing, because you're saying 40 customers, the next year it may be 60 customers. That's the nature of the tax preparation industry. It's about building relationships with people and lifelong relationships, because if they trust you with their taxes, they'll trust you with their finances, they'll trust you with their insurance, and it's a building block on services that you're able to offer. And you just have to hang in there. I'm not saying that you know, that you shouldn't get an education, but nobody should mandate that you have to go through our tests and go to our providers and pay thousands if you're hiring employees, but hopefully that's something that you will try to do, because I can tell you that I took my first tax course probably in the early 90s. I took it with my daughter. And I took it with my daughter at the time because she had just had a baby. And I wanted her to have some kind of income stream. I didn't go into it full time. I just went for the education of it all. But she went, and she's been preparing taxes for probably over 12 years now. Okay. My daughter, both of my daughters are actually entrepreneurs. My daughter, I have maybe 100 clients. My daughter has 200 to 300 clients. But she started working in major tax prep firms, and then she ran a business for another entrepreneur that started as a franchise, and then he started his own company. And she has those relationships. You can't pay one of her clients to go anyplace else. And that's the kind of business we're in. Because once you have developed those relationships with people, they are lifelong customers. They're not going anywhere. You can't pay one of my customers to go anyplace else. But the problem is that H&R Block, Jackson Hewitt are on every corners in our neighborhood. And because most times when it's tax times, people really need the money. So they're going to whoever can offer them the fastest service, irregardless of the price. And we have to re-educate them out of that, because they can't get their money back any quicker than I can. But they would make them believe that. And they advertise like they can. The difference in H&R Block that they own their own bank. So they can loan them money and offer them products that maybe you and I can't, but at a significant price. So
we're gonna have to cut it off there, but I appreciate your answering his question, and I think that's it.
So we're going to take a quick 15-minute break. There's some sandwiches outside. When we come back, Derek is going to talk about a concept that I think makes a lot of sense, and he's calling it Right to Work 2.0. The right to work without needing the government's permission to work in an occupation when there are no pressing health or safety issues for consumers. So he's going to be presenting, he wrote a paper that's in your packets, and he's going to be summarizing that paper. So we'll come back in 15 minutes at 12:30, and if people need to take a bathroom break or want to enjoy some sandwiches, please do so in the interim.
Well, I'd like to thank James and the Heritage Foundation for bringing me out here to talk about this really important issue. And as he mentioned, we released a report, Lobbying for the Future, that should be in all of your blue books that outlines exactly what we're working on and our proposal, Right to Work 2.0, that I'm going to discuss today. But first, I wanted to talk about, take a step back. And I want you to imagine in 2005, a young Mark Zuckerberg decided to launch a website then called thefacebook.com. But before he did so, he would have needed to have become a licensed social network in every state. I ask you to imagine. Imagine that to apply to become a licensed social network, Zuckerberg would have had to have paid a large licensing fee in 50 states, pay regular renewal fees, maintain addresses in every jurisdiction, and to be subject to lawsuits therein. Instead of hiring coders, a young Zuckerberg may have hired a lawyer. And to add insult to injury, what if Zuckerberg had to take an exam to become a licensed social network provider? And what if that exam was created, run, and operated by MySpace and Friendster, then the incumbent social networks? If that was the law in 2005, there would be no Facebook today. And of course, everyone in this room recognizes how patently absurd that is. But what I just described is the status quo across the country in approximately 25% of U.S. occupations. It's not a coincidence that we see dynamic competition and competitive intensity of websites and apps, but the rest of the economy has seemed to have slowed to a crawl. And the reason is that incumbent interests, industries and unions, have an interest in the status quo. And today, we've heard of how occupational licensing and union barriers are stifling economic opportunities. And these examples are admittedly egregious, but they're actually just the tip of the iceberg. Because today I'm going to describe how these barriers to work are not merely sad stories for the individuals involved, but they actually have a definite economic impact upon our society as a whole, and they're also eminently solvable. As you know, the number of occupational licenses is large across the economy. And what that means is that more and more sectors of the economy are effectively off limits to competition. In the 1950s, there's only 5% of U.S. occupations that required a license. Today, it's 25%. That means that for more than 1 in 4 professions, competition and true market forces are stifled by government regulation. Very often that regulation is run, created, and operated on behalf of incumbent firms. Now, this sounds like cronyism, and I'm going to explain how this is more than cronyism. It's actually detrimental to our economy as a whole. Because as Milton Friedman explained, licensure is essentially a medieval guild kind of regulation, where the state assigns power to members of the profession. And these measures almost inevitably become a tool in the hands of special producer groups to obtain a monopoly position at the expense of the rest of the public. Now, in Silicon Valley, where I work, there's a concept that I hope policymakers here would consider more fully. It's called permissionless innovation. Now, the concept of permissionless innovation is that someone with a good idea on a Friday can get together as friends on a Saturday, code through a Sunday, and launch an app or website on a Monday. Now, the success of their website is never assured. It's up to the market model. It's up to how they launch into the market. Most of these companies do not succeed. But the idea of permissionless innovation is that you can innovate without asking permission from anybody, let alone an incumbent firm that you're trying to, quote, disrupt. And in sectors of the economy with permissionless innovation, we see economic dynamism, incredibly high competitive intensity. Thousands of new apps and websites launch per day, and these new companies often displace old companies. Facebook succeeded because of permissionless innovation. He didn't need to hire a lawyer. He could launch small and improve his product as he grew. And in Silicon Valley, this idea of launching small with a website and seeing if it works is called a minimum viable product. You test your hypothesis on the market and you expand from there. And what we heard in the last panel was also minimal viable products. The Segway guy was talking about launching small in one marketplace, seeing what worked, trying and experimenting to hire other types of tour guides, having those fail, and then being able to expand into 3 different markets. That is how innovation happens. But innovation doesn't happen by being required to hire a lawyer, to be able to have lobbyists and PAC donations. And I personally know how hard asking investors to pay for lawyers is. I tried to launch a company in a very heavily market of campaign finance. And no one on our team was taking a single cent in salary. We couldn't find a lawyer, however, to work on equity. Now, I was a law school student at the time, but I didn't have the expertise in campaign finance law. I didn't have the connections, more importantly, with the FEC to get permission to launch our company. So we went to Silicon Valley and New York to raise money to hire a lawyer, and that lawyer would ask the FEC for permission for our company. This was a catch-22 because no venture capitalist that we talked to, perhaps it was simply my lack of oration skills, but none of them were interested in paying for a lawyer. And in the end, our company died, as so many do that you'll never hear of, because the companies that don't get funding, the companies that don't launch a website, those are the ones that are truly invisible. And that's what's so dangerous, because success in a marketplace should never be assured, but it should rest on the strength of your team and your market model and how innovative you are, not upon if you have a lawyer on your team or if you have a lobbyist. And if we want growth, job creation, and wage increases, then the objective is simple. Increase permissionless innovation as much as possible. Make the physical world look more like the app economy. Anyone with a good idea should be able to launch their product in the real world. Mark Zuckerberg didn't have to ask permission to launch Facebook, so why do we require florists to ask permission to launch their companies, and permission from incumbent florists? In Louisiana, the floral exam is twice as hard as the bar exam. Now, this has a macroeconomic impact because, as Joseph Schumpeter teaches us, a German economist, economic growth and innovation happen through a process he called creative destruction, forcing old firms to innovate or die. But with occupational licensing and other barriers to entry, which I'll touch upon, it allows for old firms to have a third option. I can innovate, I can die, or I can lobby. And that's the most dangerous of all if we care about true economic growth. When I said earlier that the 25% figure actually underestimates the problem, what I meant is that includes true occupational licensing to become a florist, to become a travel guide, all these other professions that, in my opinion, don't need licensing at all. But they don't include the issues that Uber deals with, or that Tesla deals with, not being able to sell their cars throughout the country. They don't deal with the problems that Airbnb deals with. These are all barriers to entry that affect businesses and affect people who could be in those businesses and employed in the future. And so I present to you today our solution, which is Right to Work 2.0. The issue is that state and local governments in particular, but also Congress right here, they have an incentive to pass laws and regulations to protect an incumbent industry or unions at the expense of competition. And not all regulations are misplaced, but many of them are, and many of them remain on the books long after their even stated point of utility. And each of these occupational licenses may seem small, but in aggregate, it tells a broader story of how we've calcified many sectors of this economy. And this is not a partisan problem. This is a Republican and Democratic problem. In my opinion, my organization who sponsored this report, playing whack-a-mole with each of these regulations individually is insufficient. And the reason it's insufficient is because for each of these regulations, there's a large industry that benefits from it and a rather small industry that could benefit from a change because the new players don't have lobbyists. The new players don't have PAC donations. And very often those new guys, you don't even see how big those opportunities could be. So for example, if we had eliminated an Uber, we would have never learned about Lyft. We would have never learned about Sidecar. We would have never had all these other myriad of types of industries in the sharing economy. So our solution is broader. And I will jump to that solution. Right to Work 1.0, as we call it, as you know, is the idea that an individual should be able to join a business without being forced to join a union against their will. This is very popular legislation. 60 to 70% of Americans support right to work. 25 states have adopted right to work, and the results are promising. It's working. But we believe just as an individual should be able to join a profession without being forced to join a union, they should also be able to join a profession or launch a business without being forced to get approval from a government regulator, except for a few limited cases where there's truly a legitimate health and safety benefit. But for most of them, there isn't. So how do we do this? Well, the Founding Fathers created a constitution to protect our natural rights, and John Locke himself would state that the very purpose of government was to protect these natural rights. And those natural rights included the right to launch a business. Some people aren't familiar with this debate. They see the Bill of Rights, they see a certain number of enumerated rights, but what they don't recognize is that the Ninth Amendment very clearly states that the rights not enumerated therein are retained by the people and by the states respectively. As well as the 14th Amendment Privileges or Immunities Clause very clearly enumerates that we have an economic and natural right to launch a business. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court has disregarded this about 150 years ago. And today, any regulation that affects business activity is adjudicated by the courts under a rational basis test. What that means is the courts will look and say, is there any conceivable rational basis to justify this rule and regulation? In practice, it's basically a permission slip. The court can even come up with a basis that the government themselves didn't articulate. As Clark Neely's new book explains, he says, imagine that you're a parent and your kid comes home at 2 a.m. missing his curfew, reeking of beer. And he comes in the door and you say, you're out past curfew. What were you doing? And he says, well, I was out at a party. And he said, well, you weren't allowed to be out at a party. But you said, but wait a second. Is it possible that you were visiting your grandmother in a nursing home? And then your son says, well, yeah, it's totally possible. And you say, but there's beer cans in the back of your car. What are they doing there? And he says, well, we were drinking in the car. And then the dad says, well, isn't it possible that you were collecting them for charity? And the kid says, yeah, it's totally possible. That is what rational basis test is today. That is what allows for cosmetology licenses, all these other things to survive. It's very rare that any rule, regulation, or law can actually be struck down by the court under a rational basis review. But that's not how the court looks at laws that affect religious liberty. That's not how the court looks at laws that affect freedom of speech, or that have a disparate impact upon African Americans and different racial groups, or that treat men and women differently. For those things, they use something called heightened scrutiny, either intermediate or strict scrutiny. And in those cases, if you're going to treat different people differently, the government has to justify exactly why they're doing that. And it has to be tied to a compelling or important governmental interest, and it must be narrowly tailored towards that goal. What that means is, in the case of the cosmetology license, the government would have to come in and say, well, wait a second, we have a very important, compelling government interest in people not being cut by their barber. And this license furthers that goal. And the court will say, well, wait a second, you don't actually include ancestral hair braiding. And that rule would be struck down as applied to hair braiders. Unfortunately, we can't get the Supreme Court to revise their precedent overnight. But there's actually a lot that can be done by Congress, which is that these rules and regulations, tomorrow, Congress could pass a bill saying that courts should review rules and regulations put out by agencies under a heightened scrutiny test, under intermediate or strict scrutiny. That could be done easily. As well, states could do the same, and they could require that state agencies and their rulemaking procedures are also under a heightened scrutiny procedure. They could even go further. We could have a constitutional amendment that says that all laws also have to abide by heightened scrutiny. Now, this isn't a blank check to get rid of all rules and regulations. Just as we have some rules and regulations that apply to speech, and some rules and regulations that apply to different race groups differently, and some rules and regulations that apply to religious liberty, the courts would uphold rules and regulations where there's an important governmental interest and that the laws are narrowly tailored towards those goals. But the government would have to justify why that's the case. About 100 years ago, this town decided that they were going to abdicate most of their legislating authority to executive agencies, allowing them to create rules and regulations that have the force of law. And that is why so many economic opportunities are stifled without ever being heard in this town, because it's done by this almost zombie government that is completely unaccountable by the people themselves. Now, if Congress is going to delegate the force of creating law, the force of creating statutes, de facto statutes, that have criminal penalties, the least they can do is provide proper oversight. I mean, some of these laws go back to the 19th century, and they're being interpreted in new and novel ways every day by the agencies. And so our proposal is very simple. It's not that the EPA can't regulate. It's not that HHS can't regulate, but the regulations need to be justified upon an important governmental interest. And we believe that this would strike down tens of thousands of rules and regulations across the country. And if it was a constitutional amendment, many more laws. And you may say, well, wait a second. How does anything get done in this town right now? It's so full of congressional gridlock. But the irony is that there's actually increasingly bipartisan consensus. There's conservatives, there's libertarians, and there's progressives who agree today that occupational licensing and these other barriers to entry is actually a major problem. That means that something can actually be done here. And we think that this type of approach is the way to go, because we don't think that Congress is going to unilaterally go regulation by regulation by regulation and pass an individual bill. It's too strife with cronyism and industry capture. It's a kind of perfect situation that makes it difficult for Congress to act. So our first solution is get the courts involved to protect economic liberty just as much as they protect religious liberty and freedom of speech. Our second approach is for Congress and the presidency to create a National Innovation Commission. And this commission would be tasked with looking sector by sector of the economy to identify specific barriers to entry imposed at the federal level as well as at the state level, and then, where appropriate, allow for Congress to take an up or down vote on a myriad of rules and regulations to get rid of them all at once, a BRAC-like approach. For those who are unfamiliar with BRAC, it's very difficult for Congress to shut down bases across the country because there's a base in every person's district. But when you create a big bill that basically says we're all going to take a haircut here, we're going to shut down a base in Miami, a base in California, all across the country, all of a sudden you can do this action. Similarly here, it may be difficult to get rid of one rule and regulation because you're going to hear from the cosmologists. But if you get rid of a rule and regulation for the cosmologists, the travel guys, and everyone else, you create enough energy to move forward. And if nothing else, it would begin to start a dialogue of what is actually happening in our economy? How are these rules and regulations actually stifling innovation? Because very often, they don't mean that much individually, but in the aggregate, they have a major economic impact. So in conclusion, if we do not get the economy growing, I believe that our fiscal shortfalls will increase in size, and our politics will get more divisive, and our problems will get more expensive to fix over time. Our best case scenario is to grow the economy, and the way to do that is by fostering permissionless innovation. It's by helping all the people that you saw up here today go out and do whatever it is that they want, and to inspire a whole new generation of people to go out and do whatever they want. That type of economic dynamism is where economic growth will come from in the 21st century. And the longer we wait to get the U.S. economy back on track and geared towards innovation, the more our competitors will grow and be able to outcompete us. Therefore, the number one goal for policymakers must be getting GDP growth back on track. Now, this proposal would eliminate the vast majority of outdated rules and regulations, and we believe would be the most significant change in economic policy since Ronald Reagan cut taxes from 70% to 28%. But we also believe it's eminently possible. The United States economy is barely growing. But with big challenges come big opportunities, and we have thousands of entrepreneurs, many of which you already heard today, ready to do their part to get our economy back on track. We just need to unleash their full potential. And our job, luckily, is relatively simple. Reduce government-imposed barriers to entry and thereby increase competitive intensity across the economic landscape. So with that, I invite all of you, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work.
I'd like to thank Derek for his talk. I think this is a very important approach, very important report that he's put out. I think all of these topics we've discussed today, the lack of representation of many workers' rights within the unions that are supposed to represent them, the way that the government is freezing so many workers out of jobs they could excel in, are real and serious challenges in the labor market. And these are all issues that your Heritage intends to engage on going forward. And we hope that all of you will also be active on these issues as well. Thank you very much.